No ma haere mai ki tēnei hui. Morning everyone and welcome to the Rotorua Lakes Council Community and District Development Committee for the 17th of May. Welcome to councillors and to our staff, to the media, and I see we have a number of members of the public who have called in this morning sitting at the back. Lovely to see you here, and also to our people that are listening in by way of live stream. Just a reminder, councillors, if you could have your mobile phones turned off and put away, thank you. We will take a morning break at about 11 a.m. Now going to ask Councillor Lee if you'd like to open the meeting with a karakia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Upon your advice, Madam Chair, I have cast my net in terms of a karakia for today. This particular karakia comes from Parliament and slightly modified for Rotorua. Almighty God, we give thanks for the blessings which have been bestowed on us. Laying aside all personal interests, we acknowledge the King and pray for guidance in our deliberations, that we may conduct the affairs of this committee with wisdom, justice, mercy and humility for the welfare and peace of Rotorua.
Amen.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Call for any apologies. Any apologies? Doesn't appear to be. We have a full team this morning. Any declarations of interest this morning? No, don't appear to be any. Any urgent items that are not on the agenda? No urgent items, thank you very much. There is a notice of motion that I have received from Councillor Lee that has been added as a late addition to the agenda. It has been uploaded into Stella. It was received in time. I've decided to accept the notice of motion. I wanted it recorded in the minutes that the notice of motion is in relation to an item that is already on our agenda that we're dealing with later on this morning. So we'll have the discussion at that part of the relevant meeting, which is item 7.2, which is in relation to the future development strategy. Councillors, page 6 of the agenda, moving for the confirmation of the minutes of the Community and District Development Committee meeting held on the 12th of April 2023. Can I have a mover and a seconder that the minutes be confirmed as a true and correct record? Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Moved, seconded, Councillor Patterson. Are there any items for correction? No, there don't appear to be any. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, thank you, carried. Going to move on to the first of our presentations this morning. Going to ask for, I was going to ask for, but I think he's just temporarily left. Is he waiting for our guest to arrive? Just check for a minute. Sorry, we were going to have a presentation from our District Chief Executive, Anaru Pewharangi, Mihi Owen, and the Rotorua Area Commander, Herbie Ngāwhika, to speak to the community safety presentation. Okay, we'll just be a couple of minutes. I can see them walking down the hallway, so just bear with us for a couple of minutes. Morena Anaru.
My humblest apologies, we just had to go and grab one of the busiest men in Rotorua, who being Africa, so apologies for that. We're really excited to be talking to the community safety strategy today. I'd just like to take this time to thank the Community Safety Working Group, which has included a number of police officers as well, in order to get us to today. Please have the next slide, please. So in regards to the strategy approval process, obviously we're presenting today, and what we do here is we talk to stuff that is new. We've presented twice now, and we wanted to talk to new stuff, particularly today. We certainly see value in regards to a forum with you, so that we can talk to specifics of the plan and make sure that we're meeting your expectations. And we certainly see going out to our communities is a really important piece in regards to, from our knowledge of previous consultations around community safety plans in my previous role nationally, is there's nothing better than having a plan that's developed together with our communities, so we have buy-in. So this is the proposed pathway forward. Can I have the next one, please? Now, I apologise, there is going to be a 4-minute video coming up very soon, but I think it's actually really important because the messaging that I heard in this video that we'll show very soon are really important messages for us, for Rotorua, with the leadership we have in our place. So just some things that we're really conscious of. And the Council is already working to improve housing, economy and employment. And this plan addresses symptoms only and is not the final solution. And police and RLC aim to combine our capability, focusing on public safety and including, really importantly for us, our rural and our urban communities as well. So that if there is community safety planning that we need to be conducting with our communities in those places, then we have the capability and the capacity to do that. Whilst we're very conscious that police are the lead agency by expertise, we do have resource constraints, and from our perspective, we see fantastic opportunity for Council to help augment those resource issues, and we're certainly looking forward to your help in regards to guiding us as the leaders that you are. We see a collective impact approach between police and Council as necessary to ensure Rotorua is a safe and thriving place for all to live and visit. Just for a little bit of context here, for us, looking at the community safety messaging, it's really important at the highest level that we have commitment, and declaring safety as a priority is critical. And having the Mayor, you as councillors, and our top cop committing to community safety is really important for our community. So we thank you for that. Like I said, this is a 4-minute video from News Hub, very recent. I think tells a really good picture about your expectations and what our communities can find as we plan together. Thank you, Komati.
People have been arrested across Rotorua and Taupo after a series of aggravated robberies and burglaries. They come as another spate of ram raids and shop burglaries continues up and down the country. Police have thanked the Rotorua Lakes Council for its help as part of their Community Safety Plan partnership. I'm joined now by Rotorua District Mayor Tanya Tapsell and Rotorua Area Commander Inspector Herbie Ngāwheka. Thank you so much for joining me, you guys. We'll just start, Tanya, what do you make of these arrests? 12 young people in the past week.
Look, I think there's no doubt that it's disappointing that young people are choosing to commit these crimes. But the positive thing is here in Rotorua, we've shown that by working in partnership with police, by supporting them with resources that we have with council, if you commit a crime in Rotorua, you will get caught. So it's positive that those crimes that did happen, within 24 hours, those young people were apprehended.
So you can directly point to that new plan that you guys have, the partnership between police and council, as being the reason why those 12 young people were caught so quickly?
Yes, it certainly helped. So we have that community safety plan together, but through using council resources like CCTV cameras, we were able to ensure that the pursuits were successful. We were able to find these young people after they committed the crime, and of course the police were able to take them into custody. Now that's a really positive thing for our community and a really good sign for New Zealand, who of course was losing a bit of hope when we have all of these crimes happening, but no justice occurring too. So a very strong message to the community out there, but also a very big thanks to the police for working so hard to make sure that those who are going to do the wrong things to good people in our community will get caught.
I'll bring Herbie in here. Now, Herbie, tell me a little bit about this, this partnership between the council and police. How does it work?
I think, well, good morning, everyone. First and foremost, we've decided as a community that we want to do things a little bit different here in Rotorua, and starting with this partnership with our council. And it's about bringing all our resources together and how we can actually work better together. Whether it's through using our city guardians, our wardens, our Māori wardens, and that to help with being our community eyes and ears. And then it's through that, through correct tasking and coordination, collaboratively. I think the key, though, has been the communication between ourselves and our council partners, and then by extension with our other partners across the city as well, because we all want the same thing, and that's a safe community.
Absolutely. And is this unique to Rotorua? Is this something that you guys have spearheaded?
Yes, it is. It is actually. Look, it's a flow on from other things that have been happening. We have a number of, it's been no secret over the past. We've had some publicity around other matters that have been occurring. But so this has been, like I say, that us taking control of our destiny here in Rotorua, and the great start has been with our local council, and again, like I say, with our other partners as well.
And from a council perspective as well, our community in Rotorua, we want to feel safe. Community safety is a top priority, but we acknowledge that our police only have limited resources as well. So by us actually investing in and also introducing things like city safe guardians, people who will be on the ground in our inner city, making sure that businesses are safe, and coming from it from a prevention point of view as well, has been really valuable, and we have seen positive results in Rotorua.
Look, thank you for that. If I think about my time previously and the role that Herbie is now in, I think this is one of the places I missed an opportunity. And it's fantastic to see that the timing is right now for this opportunity to be realised. So the strategy model, the strategy commits Rotorua Lakes Council and police to work together with and for our communities as a collective to achieve a safer Rotorua. Herbie's going to talk a little bit from his perspective now as well.
Morena koutou. From a police perspective, that whole, I can't stress enough the collaborative piece here, the collaborative partnership. It's something that we've been doing with the police and that now for quite some time. And if I use the example, I suppose, with our iwi communities, in terms of we have a police advisory board where I'm discussing all sorts of issues with our koeke, and through that, we're able to work with them on a number of things. And just a further example of that is in terms of our approach to our situation with housing, etc. But that's been in play for quite some time, and so it's been a crucial part of Rotorua Police. And it's something, now this is the exciting part moving forward of what we're going to be doing here. If I just go back to that clip, I think that was a great example of a situation that happened, but being able to respond in a real timely manner. That was key, because it shows our community, I think, if something happens like that, they can expect a quick result. And then that was just a small example of how that can work. I know there's a lot of things that we have to do to fine-tune a lot of things, but here's the exciting part moving forward for us, I think, is how we do that.
But the key part is that we're going to be doing it together through their regular discussions, and we're all on the same page. And that is going to be crucial moving forward.
Thanks, Herbie. So that collective partnership between police and Rotorua Lakes Council to achieve collective impact becomes an important part of our strategy model. For us, knowing what works and doing the right things. The integrated deployment that you heard the Mayor speak to in regards to how police are working alongside our guardians, alongside our CCTV camera operators, and with our animal controllers and others, is a really important piece about how we integrate together, because we realise that there are resource constraints, but actually working together will enable us to deliver on a safer community with our people. These things are all glued together by leadership. The previous video was leadership and commitment to this kaupapa in a way that I haven't seen anywhere else in the country. For us, a solid evidence base informs both theory and practice, ensuring a disciplined deployment. We want our people, both police and council, to be in the right places at the right times, doing the right things. So if we need to reassign ourselves in regards to what that looks like, that's certainly part and parcel of our disciplined deployment. Strong stakeholder engagement grounds the theory we're talking about into context and supports stakeholder buy-in and collective impact. Hence, again, the importance of not only engaging with you and going through forums, but also engaging with our communities to understand that what we're going to be doing will meet their expectations. And all through this is a capability build that we're going to do. So from police, they will also learn alongside us. As ambassadors, we have our community safety teams, from our city guardians right through to our engagement with animal control, and also with partnerships with our Māori Wardens Network. We're also really conscious about how we might strengthen neighbourhood support groups, how we might also strengthen community patrols, how else do we also support community and neighbourhood leadership. So these are things that we are conscious of within our strategy model. So what's new? We didn't want to bring anything to you that's not new. So what's new from us, and what can the public expect to see, Herbie?
Well, obviously, as you can see, the focus is going to be on CBD. And, sorry, as you can see on there, the focus is going to be initially on the CBD area. From a police perspective, most of you are aware we have reinstated our community constable, Constable O'Keefe, and what it's highlighted to me is, from the feedback that I've received just from him being in there on, being a constant in the CBD, it's highlighted that we actually need some support around him to provide more visibility. So there's going to be a second member that will be joining him on the full-time role. And then, by extension, it's how we utilise the rest of our work groups, have them working late shifts, just changing their shifts around so we can increase that visibility. The message is clear from what I've heard from within the community, especially our retailers. They want to see uniformed members walking around our CBD, and I get that. So that's, with my leadership team, this is what we're working towards as part of our normal business BAU, is to increase that visibility within that CBD, and doing it immediately by increasing some support around Constable O'Keefe with another full-time member, utilising the rest of our work groups within the station to provide that support around our CBD.
Thanks, Herbie. Also, you'll see there about priority areas. So that includes rural and urban communities. One of the changes we've made at Council here is that Mihi and I have made ourselves available, and we participate in the rural and Lakes Community Board meetings as and when required. Now, the purpose around that is to hear directly from the community about what their needs are so that we can work with police in regards to how do we put together community safety plans. It's similar, Councillor Patterson, to the meeting we have coming up in Tingai. But these are things that are really important to us to ensure that, yes, the CBD is a priority and Fenton Street. Equally, we have a responsibility together in regards to how we support community policing and how we support rural policing models as well. So there's another feature here that's new. Herbie from police in regards to reporting.
One of the other measures we're wanting to put in place is that whole reporting piece, regular reporting. Again, to me, that's crucial. That shows us, that gives us a couple of things there. It shows us in terms of our demand and calls for service, whether we're doing things right. If we're looking at the CBD for now. If we're not, then it gives us the opportunity to change things around while we're going through this period here. But it's also actually about making sure that once with that reporting that we know that we are utilising our resources, I suppose, in the right places at those right times. And so that's going to be quite a crucial piece. So I'm committed to ensuring that I have that information ready. On I think we're looking at a reporting on a quarterly basis at the moment. So I'm quite open for us to have that information there because we want to make sure we're doing things right, I suppose. We don't want to be coming back and rehashing things when we don't need to. It's about just, I suppose, ticking the right boxes, making sure we're all aligned.
Now, this is something that the Mayor has been asking us for a little while, and so certainly the regular reporting being quarterly. And part of this is our focus on signal crime. I know we've spoken to you about signal crime before, your graffiti, your littering, things that make our people feel unsafe, the disorder type offending. These are things that we're going to be working with the police in regards to being able to bring a regular report back to you, because we have a commitment within this partnership as well, and we'll talk to that very soon as well.
Sorry, I just want to add, just following on from that, and just as an example, we're working with a couple of our major retailers at present around visiting them on site and say, hey, look, what are your measures that you're doing to keep yourselves and your premises safe? And it's just working in with them, so they're also taking some accountability around what they can do. But offering suggestions, and it's all part of from the National Retail Crime Group, that's been launched recently. So we're trying to front foot that here in Rotorua, and then get, while we're doing this, we're also doing that as well. And again, this is the sort of information that we can bring back to the group or to our discussions to say, hey, this is happening, etc. So just an example for you about how that's working.
Thank you. And then from an RLC's perspective, you'll see enhanced CCTV providing more cameras and monitoring coverage. So we look for opportunities, national opportunities, to enhance our CCTV network through identifying funding solutions. And one of those Herbie's just spoken to, there's a national retail crime fund, and we're working with BOPLAS at the moment to secure some funding in regards to CCTV SIPTED initiatives such as bollards and speed, so we'll be able to come back to you with that. Secondary to this in regards to working alongside police in partnership is it does open the door again for us to be looking at the proceeds of crime fund and other funds that we can work together collectively on. So we need your help, and this is a plea to not only yourselves as councillors but also to our members of the public. While we've largely focused our attention on public safety, we know that there is more work to be done and for our communities for long-term sustainable change. We want to engage with our councillors through a forum on more specifics of the action plan so that we can hear from you. We also want to engage with our community through consultation and feedback. Herbie and I have had conversations in regards to making ourselves available to be part of that, and his team, so we can be very clear about what we're hearing from our communities and from you. Additionally, we're thinking about, and we have ideas around longer-term strategic priorities, such as how do we enhance safety in public spaces? What does building cohesion and resilience look like? How do we help people stay safe? How do we continue to develop partnerships that are meaningful in regards to the problems we have within some parts of our communities? How do we work together with those communities? Oh, thank you. I want Herbie to talk to the 50% reduction of violence and antisocial behaviour in CBD by 2026, because when I caught up with Herbie and we discussed this, yeah, I'd like him to talk to that, but I just want to remind us before he does that, some of the biggest challenges you have in development of any community safety plans are collaboration, information sharing, and performance measures. I hope today you've heard that those aren't issues for us. They're actually opportunities that have been created through your leadership, through the leadership of key people within our communities, that those are opportunities for us. So within our strategy development, we've seen those as significant opportunities. But this 50% reduction, I'd like Huey to talk to before I say a few words on that as well.
So the 50% reduction that we've got up there, I think it's aspirational, but I think it needs to be. What it does is, I think it shows our commitment to this, to what we want to achieve here. I can make it known to you that my leadership team, my management, are very clear on my expectations around this. You know, I still go back to when I first come into this role. One of the first things I said is I wanted my granddaughter to grow up in a safe town, and I maintain that. So they are very clear on what my expectations are, and I suppose it also anchors us to this. I'm sitting here talking to you about this, and I wouldn't be saying it if I didn't believe in it, and I think it's that we can do this, and I think we're taking the right steps moving forward. Thanks,
Herbie. Now, in previous presentations, we've spoken to you about 30% of crime, or one third of crime occurs in the CBD. Herbie and I have discussed this as an aspirational goal, but one of the things it does is it anchors both of us, anchors us as the RLC to play our part within the resourcing of this as well, to deliver on that priority. This will be performed part and parcel of the reporting that we spoke to earlier, is in regards to this target. And so if I move forward to next steps, so these, obviously there's the forum and these things that we have here that we've seen in the first slide, but there is going to be a budget discussion as we look to this as well, given the resourcing that we're looking at, and potentially what we find through our reporting. But certainly those are conversations we'd have with you as well. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Anaru, and Area Commander Ngāwhiki for coming along this morning, and Mihi for joining the team as well. Councillors, do we have any questions around the Community Safety Plan? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the presentation. The 50% reduction in violence and antisocial behaviour in the CBD, just to be absolutely clear, includes Fenton Street.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes it does.
So the baseline for that is pre-COVID and pre the problems we had during the homeless issues in Fenton Street, or is it, where does the baseline, 50% of what? What number do you start with?
So those are discussions that Herbie and I were just saying there, they'll have with their data teams and our teams to work that based on that. Certainly something we can talk to in the forums as well as to where our starting point is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tēnā koutou, morena, nau mai. Thank you for the presentation, and you touched on it earlier, Anaru. You said timing. Timing is important. Yeah, and so what I saw, what you put up there, I think it is good timing, and we've always had a safe and caring community as a priority for us, so I appreciate the mahi that you've done. The question I'd like to ask is, you said, Herbie, earlier that 50% down by 2026. When are most of the stats, when are the most times that it happens? Is it during the day or night, overnight? When is the most time that we can work on to try and bring some of those things down?
Got it, Trevor. I probably couldn't give you an exact sort of thing around there, but if I'm going to generalise here a bit and to say that, well, there's obviously more people are out and about during the day, but so is our police force. They're out during the day, but it's in that evening time, especially towards the back end of the week, where we tend to find a lot more people or a lot more offences occurring, I suppose. And again, I'm just talking generally here, but we can certainly have that information, and it's certainly something we'll have to use as a baseline anyway, moving forward. And then that's what I mean, around their regular reporting then gives us, as we move forward into this, once we officially start it, the regular reporting is going to become so crucial, because it'll then tell us whether the offences are occurring at those times that we think they are, or it's in fact we're off target, we need to adjust. So whilst I can't answer that definitely, it is something that we are going to be relying on heavily in terms of information as we move forward.
I enjoyed you're already working with the community when you had that police, Rotorua Lakes Council and the Chinese community in the library. That was, I thought, a good way of engaging with them. Can I ask, I'm thinking of the evening times, do you have the taxis, federations sort of supporting, because they can be eyes and ears out there as they're doing their mahi. Are they on board and helping with this?
I suppose they would be part of that larger, the larger group, and that's going to come down to our messaging that we get out to the community as we move forward. I almost see this as getting back to the old community sort of style policing. Back in the day, we used to have community hubs spread out amongst the community, but it's encouraging our community to actually report things, and so we need to get back to those sort of ways, I believe, because once we get that happening, then that information coming in, we'll know it's going to be so valuable for us moving forward. So, yeah, look, that is a consideration, and it's a real consideration for us, but there's probably a number of other considerations in that regard as well. So it's actually tapping into all those ones. Yeah, and it's about knowing what works. So.
Councillor Wari.
Tēnā koe te heamana o tira morena koutou. Me te hapori whānui too. Welcome to the general public. Kia ora auntie, ai te pēhea koe. Just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I'll keep them brief. In terms of the strategy here, you know, part of the council strategy also and another kaupapa is to bring more events to Rotorua. Ki te whakanui te hapori nei, you know, bring that economic boost to the city and their vibrancy. Is there a particular strategy in place for events, or is that another kaupapa, I suspect, that would be talked about in that forum that's been mentioned?
Kia ora, Rawari. In terms of for events, look, we want the events here as well as the police force. So the challenge for us is to making sure those go off, you know, that everyone has a good time. But it's the same challenge we have for any visitors that come to Rotorua. we've had some good events that have been through just recently with the Crankworks, etc. We had the marathon, obviously. Crankworks, for example, went off without a hitch. You wouldn't even have known that there were that many people in town, so it was awesome. But it is something that we're continually looking at. As we know, events are coming up, and I guess this will be at the top of our list moving forward as well, as events are coming. Okay, what have we got in place now to ensure that this happens, that people have a good time, have a safe time? We want people to stay, so it's, I suppose, from a police perspective, again, it's no different to what I'm assuming our councillors want as well. We want people coming to Rotorua, but when they come, it should be a good experience.
Good answer. I'm glad to hear that. Just one other question, one more quick one. In terms of the effectiveness of this partnership, which, by the way, I'm 100% supportive of, does this give you, I suppose, more mana to go back to your people in Wellington to say, hey, this is working well in the community? Does that equal more resourcing to do things here from the police perspective?
I think what it does show is that we're not going to sit idle. We're not going to wait for these resources. We want to. I suppose that's what I meant about doing things a bit differently than that. We can either, I look at it two ways. We can either sit on our hands and wait for the cavalry, but I'd rather us do something more, get in front of it now. And for me, this is the perfect. Well, it makes sense. This makes sense for me.
Okay, it's quite, no. All I was meaning was, we're gonna keep going. Was maybe there's an opportunity there to.
And I think opportunities will come from that.
Kia ora.
Once they see it happening, it'll show a way for a lot of other communities who are probably in the same boat as us. But we want to be out there in front doing this, So
just to add to that, certainly there's been conversations had with Deputy Commissioner Haumaha, who is in charge of community policing for New Zealand Police. One of the things here to consider is we prove concept here. It's a fantastic opportunity for police and other councils nationally to do similar things. So it becomes really important for us to hear from you and our communities about what this looks like together so that we can prove concept in regards to what we're doing for those national discussions that you're talking about.
Kia ora, thank you. I don't think there's anybody in Rotorua that doesn't want a safer community. So, kai te miha tura kia koutou, kia koe hubi e nui te mahi, kai mui ia koe, engari, kia ka hatonu, kia ora.
Councillor Kiriopa.
Morena, through the chair. Thank you very much for your presentation, guys. Just as a bit of context to my questions, we had discussions between police and mana whenua around the pea epidemic that was ravaging our communities a few years ago, and the overwhelming feedback from mana whenua was rather than trying to support police to catch pea, those who are dealing pea in our communities, we were more interested in how could we help our whānau, where's the support for our whānau who are addicted to pea, rather than punishing them. And I just wonder, with that as the context, is there any consideration and resourcing at all within this partnership being allocated to looking at the contributing factors resulting in crime locally? And is this not an opportunity to identify solutions that support our whānau rather than focusing solely on punishing our rangatahi?
Kia ora, Lani. Thank you for that question. So around methamphetamine, so that is something obviously that's been, that's always on our table. We have enough resources, I believe, in terms of, well, we've dedicated a lot of resources in terms of the enforcement side around methamphetamine. Around that whole prevention piece, the education piece, we have got programs in place around that, and I agree with what you're saying. It's about actually trying to work with them to move them away from it. So we've got a program currently underway in Murupara, which has been part of a national rollout as well. Te Akamori it's called. And it's about getting help for these people. So that's a staged rollout that's been through the police, and also it's in partnership with Te Whatuora, that one. And the next stage is they're looking at us to come here in Rotorua, especially around the bay, because obviously our wastewater testing results have indicated that Bay of Plenty is very high on that list. So that is happening. There are also other, through our, as our frontline come across these people in need, we have a number of referrals that we can make to providers to get them help. So what I'm saying is we're not trying to put them through the courts or punish them, as the first port of call. For the dealers in it, probably yes, but for our people who are users and want to make a change, there's certainly avenues there that we're trying to get them help and working with our community groups to ensure that they get that help. So that's all the focus.
Just got a comment here from our Chief Executive too.
Through the Chair, Councillor Kiriopa, I think it's actually also worthwhile at some early stage in the future to present back to you on the design work around our Housing Work Stream 1. What that is all about is trying to identify those families, those whānau who are most at need, and actually wrapping new support services around them. It's not just about housing, it's also about the support that they need to address any particular challenges that the family are facing at a particular time. So if you like, these initiatives very much dovetail together, and so you're quite correct when you say that there needs to be the preventative support component. And I think what we'll be able to do for you in the near future is to outline how the housing strategy with the work stream and the partnership with Te Arawa in it is actually planning some quite intensive work around those most vulnerable whānau and families.
Thanks, Jeff. Mayor Tapsell.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, through you. Thank you for being here this morning. Look, last night we launched the nominations for the Tompkins Wake Rotorua Business Awards, and when I spoke about some of the work that we've been doing together and collectively to make Rotorua safer, it was met by a room full of applause, so it's certainly appreciated to date. My question is around the Community Constable. So it was a really big success for us here in Rotorua to reintroduce a community constable, and we've already heard great feedback. You mentioned a second member joining him as well. Is that in a community constable role or a support role? And then I have one more question.
In the community constable role.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic news for Rotorua to have two community constables out there. Also, you have mentioned working with other partners. It is really important with the limited resources that we are working together for a better Rotorua. Really appreciate your aspirational approach and your proactive approach of making the most of what we have. Who are some of the other partners that you've had discussions with or plan on working with to ensure that this community safety plan is successful?
So the other one are our other government partners. So I sit on the All Government Group alongside Anaru, and this has been raised with them as well, because I think they all have a role to play in this, especially for our local government partners. And and it also helps address a lot of our other issues in that we have as well, in terms of our housing and our backpacker hostel situation. So that whole safety piece for me goes right across, right across the spectrum there. So I think it's important that they're aware of it, and it's about, well, I see it as about holding each other to account on that as well. When things, if they're not doing something that they should be doing, then we need to know that's a place where we need to be holding them to account and asking those questions. So not expect nothing less in return. Obviously, Te Arawa, that has to be front and foremost for us here in Rotorua. And again, that's why I suppose I raised the piece earlier around our police advisory board, because that's important that they're aware of what's going on. And it's surprising, well, it's not surprising, but they can, Rotorua will open a lot of doors for us as government agencies around connecting with our people. And it makes sense. Unfortunately, the majority of the people we're dealing with are our own, or are Māori, Te Arawa, whakapapa. So for me, that's a no-brainer.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report. Just got a few questions. Firstly, just an update from the last presentation. I asked about the crime associated with the idiots on the dirt bikes. And Phil Gilbank said that you were about to undertake an operation, that you had some ideas of where these people were at, and has anything come of that?
Good morning, Don. Yes, we have an operation underway. So without, I suppose, I don't want to
don't give anything away.
Detail, but there is, we understand that that's had a big impact on our community as well, you know, amongst other things, but it's that whole, the perception that it gives off, you know, when people see this happening, and so, yeah, that is definitely underway. But I'd rather probably not go into details around it.
If I could add though, this helps us in regards to bylaws. So as an example, you know, we have a liquor ban that we've been able to use our bylaws for. For those types of activities, we could certainly use our bylaws again. And that has certainly become very helpful. I think for us as council, we are looking to you in regards to some of these things that matter, so that we can provide that partnership support to police to enable them to use the full raft of their tools available to them. And a bylaw is a great way for us to be able to do some things alongside our police.
Excellent. I was actually going to get to that point, so thanks for raising that. I mean, is there anything else other than bylaws? I mean, as you mentioned, with the one with the liquor ban on Fenton Street gave you extra teeth. Are there other bylaws that we could bring in that could help you? I think my fellow councillor over there has got his idea on one, and I mentioned the dirt bike one. Are there any other things that we could do to help police? I mean, for example, those thoroughfares that they use that are walkways, can we improve the bollards or the things in there to stop them from taking their bikes through there? What else can we do to help you?
Yeah, I certainly think, Councillor Patterson, that when we come to those forums, be great to hear more detail about those types of things, so we can really turn our minds to the absolute detail. Picking up on your point, there have been conversations held with Councillor O'Brien around some other matters that have been raised with the police that we'll be looking into as well around bylaws. I'm just conscious that that would be a really good chance for us to talk at forums and get your feedback as councillors in regards to what those things are that would make us feel safer together.
Kapai, just one more question, just with regards to clarification for the people who are here today and also watching online, the use of, we're now doubling our community constables in the CBD, fantastic. When we utilise our city guardians, are they like force multipliers? So there would be one community constable accompanied by two city guardians, so that you've got a bit of backup if required. Is that how they're utilised?
Certainly how we deploy will be, there's an opportunity for us through conversation with the police about how we reorganise ourselves. So example being is it's not unusual, it's very common actually for police to have a sergeant and then a team of people. Now the team of people don't necessarily have to be sworn officers, but they do need to be people who are engaged within the community. So certainly we see the opportunity here with two community constables for us to have some potential pseudo-supervision that enables us to make sure we're deploying to the right places at the right time and doing the right thing. So example would be if our guardians were able to do some of the lower level things, then it would free up our constables with sworn powers to be able to take care of stuff that really matters to our retailers about the response that they expect and deserve, as well as obviously reassuring the community through their visibility. So we're certainly looking to reorganise ourselves in regards to how we deploy with our police staff.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and comments through the Chair. Thank you, Rotorua Mihi, for your presentation, and Herbie, thank you very much for coming along today. And I think we should also acknowledge how often you come and make yourself available. We all know how busy you are, so we appreciate it. May I ask, Herbie, has the police done any work that you're aware of, or perhaps a partner agency like Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Social Development? We have a strategy which I fully support, but can I ask, the strategy is about what? Sort of like, what's the baseline? So can I ask, is there any sort of work been done on where the actual crime has been caused from? And if I could mention, for example, Fenton Street issues. Has there been any work done to identify the actual amount of crime caused by those, say, in emergency housing, or those that haven't been, sorry, shall we say, have moved to Rotorua in recent times? Has there been any work done by either police or any other agency? Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor. In terms of drilling down that far, I'm not too sure if there's been actual work done around there. What I can say from a police perspective, what has been done is we've done comparisons. Say if we use Fenton Street as the example, we've done comparisons from last year, and again for the same period this year. So it's a 6-month comparison of what our calls for service, what our demand has been for all our emergency accommodation. If we look along Fenton Street and with our backpackers and hostels. What I can say from that is we can break it down to the numbers of times we've had to attend, to break it down to the number of offences or the types of offences we've had to attend. And then if we look at the comparisons, if you compare it to the 6 months this year, or the period this year that we did it, I think it was from October 2022 to end of March this year, in the same comparison from the previous year. This year, the number of offending calls, our demand along Fenton Street has reduced significantly. Where it has gone up is with our backpackers and hostels, which tells us, that obviously, we know the number of emergency hotels along Fenton Street have reduced, but the people from there have more than likely, well, this is the assumption now that they've gone into our backpackers, they've gone into our hostels. So, and if you look at the volume of offences now that we're looking at, it's a lot of that, I suppose, the vagrancy, the dishonesty type offences. Because what we do know from that, and this has come from our partner agencies, they can tell us what the makeup of our cohort in these, in the backpackers and that, and there are a lot of social issues that come with them, mental health, alcohol and drug. And this is no secret, we know this. So whether we're making, I suppose we can read that in two ways then, whether we're making progress in reducing our Fenton Street accommodation, or whether we're just merely shifted the problem. No, that's, I can't answer that. But coming back to your original question, sorry, I'm not too sure if that work has been drilled right down that deep, and even in terms with our other partners.
If I might just add to Councillor O'Brien, there is a direct link between our community safety work and the housing accord, and so working alongside police becomes really important for us, because the two need to be linked together in order to make our communities safer. So there will be demand reporting that will enable us to make informed decisions together about how we deploy and what things we need to bring back to you as councillors.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that answer. Could I just say, though, I think many people would share a concern, and I hope that perhaps with our housing accord there may be an opportunity for some resourcing for an in-depth study, interdepartmental study on those, because merely looking at how many incidents or occurrences that take place on Fenton Street or even in the wider Glen Home, doesn't really, in my opinion, sort of cover the concerns that many of those people in those areas have, because they look at some of that just shifting elsewhere. So thank you for that. Could I also ask, I see from your plan, there seems to be a lot of work there for RLC. And one of the concerns I have here today is it's great that you're here, and Herbie, it's great you're here, but I'm concerned about who isn't here. MSD isn't here. I don't see the Department of Education anywhere, yet we have a very large truancy problem, in my opinion, that we urgently need to address. So I see a lot of work for RLC, but I wonder if there isn't some opportunity for some other government agencies to perhaps find their way to spare us a little bit of time. Thank you.
If I may comment, certainly as Herbie has said, there is an all-of-government commitment to community safety. For us, as we develop the partnerships more, based on our forums and what we hear from our communities, we will certainly be taking those types of topics, such as truancy, unemployment and other things, to our partners to ensure that there is a commitment to what our Mayor and you have as a priority. And we can take that on board here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll draw that discussion to a close. It's been a good discussion this morning, so thank you to our presenters, and thank you, Area Commander Ngāwhika, for taking the time out. I think that we're making some great progress towards our priority of a safer community. That's a fairly aspirational target of a 50% reduction in crime in the CBD, but I think great steps in terms of having a second community constable on the beat will give the community some assurance. And I think we look forward to the next part of the work when we undertake some further consultation and get this plan actually fully up and running. But thank you for the discussion this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And apologies for our slight lateness. Apologies for that.
Thank you. Councillors, we're now moving to page 11 of our agenda, moving on to the staff reports. This is an amendment to the Rotorua NZ Limited's constitution. By way of background, you'll recall that we are currently going out for recruitment of some new board members. JP is going to speak to that, but could I ask for a move and a seconder to receive the report amendment to the Rotorua NZ Limited's constitution be received? Moved Councillor O'Brien, seconded Councillor Waru. All those in favour please say aye. Those against, thank you, carried. Welcome, JP.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. I'll take this item as read, if that's all right, councillors. It's fairly simple. It's an administrative change for us, just to ensure we've got some flexibility as we go through the recruitment process over the next few months. It also provides us with some flexibility going forward. That's why it's been done as a change to the Constitution, and does not affect the minimum number of board members who create the quorum for meetings. So just an administrative change on that basis.
Any questions, councillors? Don't appear to be any. Can I then ask for a mover and a seconder that clause 6.1 of Rotorua NZ Limited's constitution be amended to state the number of directors may not at any time be less than 4 and not more than 7, moved by Councillor Waru. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wang. Any discussion? It's fairly straightforward.
Pretty straightforward, Madam Chair.
Then I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour please say aye. Those against? Thank you, that is carried. Just by way of a small advertisement, while we've got some members of the public here and also people listening in on live stream, we currently have 2 live advertisements going out for board directors for the Rotorua Airport and for Rotorua NZ. So if you want to have a look at those advertisements, they'll be available on LinkedIn, Seek, and I think some other sites as well, or perhaps ask Council for a copy of that advertisement, because we'd love to have as many people apply for those director positions as possible. Thank you, JP, for that. Councillor Maxwell, is this relating to this matter, because we've just dealt with the resolution?
JP, is there the opportunity for any board directors to be present by Zoom? Is that permissible like we do have here? some travel overseas and that a lot, I notice. Yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to clarify that the answer is yes. So we obviously it's better to be around a table for meetings, but Zooms are used quite frequently.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to the proposed future development strategy. So this is the opportunity for Council to have the input into the future 30-year plan for Rotorua and how and where Rotorua's growth will occur if and when we need it. So I'm welcoming Damon Mathfield to the table as well. So welcome, Damon. I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report that the proposed future direction strategy be received. Moved Councillor Lee, seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favour please say aye. Those against? Thank you, carried. Now going to ask Damon and JP if you would just overview the report and speak to your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just start off with a couple of the slides, but just in starting, obviously this is an important piece of an integrated package of changes for us to ensure that we have sufficient capacity for housing in the short, medium and longer term, that we're making sure we have flexibility around our planning rules to ensure that we've got the types of homes that need to be built here. In the past we've talked about, for us as a council, a significant issue about the missing middle, so I can detail that later on as well. And also very much driven by central government around the timeframes. So this is a series of actions and integrated approaches being driven out of the National Policy Statement of Urban Development, and as a Tier 2 council we're required to meet certain timetables. So one of the important things for me is really to acknowledge Damon, Simon, Anna and Kim. We've got a very small planning policy team, and they've worked exceptionally hard and had to pull in a lot of consulting support to make sure that we're able to work in a fast pace because of the timeframes that have been set by government around this, but ensuring that at every step of the way they're trying to make sure that those conversations with the community are taking place and the research base is as solid as possible. So I'd really like to acknowledge Damon and the team who have gone above and beyond in the speed and the detail and the care they've taken in preparing these different pieces of work. So what's before you today, of course, is the future development strategy. So this is getting out of our immediate plan change requirements and starting to map out what we need to do for growth capacity over the next 30 years. So importantly, part of that, of course, is a sense that we review it every 3 years and we redo the entire future development strategy every 6 years. This replaces the spatial plan we completed in 2018 and puts a lot more solidity around the information base and the technical information. But also through that national policy statement, a critical piece here is it also makes the regional council jointly responsible for this plan. So through this agenda item, you'll see the joint committee to look at how we receive the submissions back from our community on the FDS, but also that chance to say we get an important implementation plan around that, which should inform both councils' long-term plans as they move forward. And for us, that certainly should direct us as to what our next plan changes are, what are the infrastructure investments that should be made by the Rotorua Lakes Council and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. So a really important process for us to bring those two parts together. And obviously here too there's a very specific methodology which says about how we do those projections. One of the biggest issues we have as a community is the speed of change around planning. Planning lags behind often the changes we see from growth. And of course, the implications of that are we don't see development proceeding in the right speed. We see consequential increases in house prices and rent prices, and the pressure then going on that supply. So one of the important parts of this is to make sure we're really clear with our community about how we get a good urban form, how we do the best investment in our infrastructure, and we have that capacity to be available if it's required. So that's a really important part of it. And also give the chance for the community to see that balance between infill and greenfield development and the development of communities. So probably one of the most important pieces here is that the team have spent a lot of time over the last year working through engagement with a host of different groups, including other local authorities, iwi and hapu landowners, as well as community groups and right down to students. So a really significant amount of work. One of the challenges the team have had, of course, is that because we're working through the National Policy Statement on Urban Development Requirements, we've got a number of moving pieces. So part of the job of the team is to be really clear with the community about what's come through from the decisions around medium density residential standards, what's going to be picked up immediately in the plan change for intensification, Plan Change 9, and what then also gets passed through to the longer term strategic view. So all the times they're trying to make sure that the community can navigate through where that advice and that information should be going for the different processes. So that's just my introduction to this part of the item. So looking forward to the discussion and any questions we may have. I'll hand across now to Damon just to guide you through the key elements of the FDS.
Thanks, JP, and thanks for the opportunity to come and present here. I think obviously it's quite you will have the document in front of you, which is the future development strategy. There's also a consultation document as well that goes out to the public, which is a leaner document to go through and gives you a good overview of the overall strategy. But just just to sort of set the scene, I guess, spatially, is that we could break the strategy down in terms of its what it provides in terms of residential and also what it provides in terms of business. So I think the key backdrop, as JP alluded to, was essentially the intensification plan change, which enables a lot of intensification over time, which is really that pale yellow area across the map, which covers most of the urban area. So PC9 to a degree does all the heavy lifting in terms of providing for additional homes over time. Remember, we're talking about a 30-year period out to 2053. Long-term intensification, we got to bear that in mind, that obviously being a big picture strategy towards 2030, we got to look at likely locations for longer-term intensification, and those are those brown dashed lines there showing obviously Nangatai, further south to where we've currently zoned in our current plan change, or what we propose zoning for high density around Glenholme, and then around the Tina shopping centre area, which is the Owhata, and we'll touch on the reasons why later on. Then in terms of existing greenfield locations, I think many will know Pukahangi and Wharenui Rise are our existing locations where we've got greenfield developments going on, and that obviously provides a layer of capacity. And then certainly what we'll touch on today is obviously quite importantly is new residential greenfield locations that will come on in different phases over time, over the short, medium and long term. So I think just for reference, when I refer to short, medium and long term in the presentation, short term is generally referred to as 3 years, medium term 10 years and long term 30 years. So I'll be using short, medium and long quite frequently, so in case there's confusion around that. And then in business, we're looking at those locations. I think you can see that pale blue circle at the top there. That's really looking at future tourism opportunities for future tourism activities along State Highway 5, and then also looking at light industrial greenfield opportunities in that purple area close to the airport and Eastgate Business Park. So that kind of gives you a sort of a snapshot or elevator pitch, I guess, in terms of what the strategy is trying to drive at. I think a key thing in terms of our approach to residential is by and large to try and achieve a compact city outcome. And this is in line with the NPSUD policy, ensuring that obviously we have efficient growth. And by compact city, I mean ensuring that most of our growth occurs by and large within that grey area, which is our existing urban area. But obviously looking at the yellow areas there in the map are our new greenfield locations for residential. And you'll see that they interface with the existing urban area, as well as being proximate to key state highways or corridors. And then also in terms of, sorry, just going back a slide, in terms of the Mauve area, I think you can just sort of make it out along State Highway 30, which is our business locations, or also close to our existing urban area and our existing corridors. But also underpinning this is a centres-based approach, so those purple dots are essentially our centres. Centres create quite a key function in terms of supporting further residential development, so we do need to pay attention in terms of the role and function of the centres going forward, both with respect to intensification and in terms of enabling future growth in greenfield locations. So quickly, underpinning that is, I guess, the hierarchy of centres and making sure that we have a good functioning hierarchy. So the big purple dot in the middle is our city centre, and that effectively is the centre that is really the hub of our retail, office and cultural activities, and we want to ensure that we support that through the actions that we put in place. And then, quite importantly, are our other major centres. So we've got Nongatai and that location around Owhata, which is around the Tina Centre, becoming quite important in the future because of the yellow areas that we've identified for future residential development. So those are key centres going forward and providing support for that growth. And then obviously a number of secondary and tertiary centres, which are the smaller mauve circles, which are quite important in terms of supporting intensification going forward. I think lastly, just to mention, our corridors also play an important role. For example, Fenton Street has been enabled for greater heights through the plan change, and we want to obviously support that greater residential development with improvements to the corridor over time. So there's a quick rendered images below showing Fenton Street now and Fenton Street later. Obviously what you see there is improvements with respect to enabling greater, I suppose, modes of transport, and particularly active modes of transport to get people moving in different manners across that centre and making it more active across that corridor. Just broadly in terms of our approach to business, I've mentioned the network of centres being quite important, and that's particularly in terms of delivering the services that we need. So in terms of business services, centres play a key role. I think a key part of the strategy was also identifying alternative locations for the relocation of industrial activities that are less compatible with existing areas. So we've got residential areas that have surrounded areas of or legacy industrial areas. So those red arrows show where we would like to, I suppose, incentivize the relocation of business. So away from, for instance, Napuna, which is kind of shown on the southeast, and also away from Fairy Springs, kind of in the middle of the image there, in the western side of the picture, to the west of State Highway 5. And then quite importantly, Nongatai as well. And this has an important, with respect to Nongatai, it has important regenerative function, because I suppose currently you've got these awkwardly located car yards and industrial activities right in the centre. And ideally what we want to do is try and incentivise the relocation of that to the south of Nongatai. So that centre becomes more of a mixed-use residential commercial centre. And then obviously ensuring that we've got an efficient regional transport connection along State Highway 30, which is signalled by that dark purple arrow. And it's quite important that that continues to function as a key corridor for moving, I suppose, key freight from the south, from businesses in the south, where you see Pekka Block, right in the south of the picture, through to the port, which is in the northeast. And overwhelmingly business supported location on that corridor in order to, I suppose, fit into their growth picture. That red dotted circle on State Highway 30 on the, I suppose, on the right-hand side of the picture, right at the top, also is an indication where we've signalled greenfield growth for light industrial activity, which is close to the airport, but also just south of the Eastgate Business Park. And it makes sense that we expand the business opportunities in that location for the reasons I mentioned. I think with respect to the tourism sector, which is quite important, we flagged, I think you could just make out the yellow hashed sort of areas to the south of Nangataia. It's the key northern gateway, I guess, to Rotorua, so it's important that we provide future land for tourism activities, which is that peachy area in that circle to the south of Nangataia. And then also to our southern gateway along State Highway 5, going past the Pekka Block into Fenton Street, or into Fenton Street being quite important in terms of improving the quality and amenity of Fenton Street for tourism activities over time. I think another key factor of a future development strategy is signalling that you've got sufficient capacity to cater for growth. And I think quite importantly, we've got an evidence base that supports that we need to provide for about 10,000 homes by 2053. But what we have provided for is 12,300 homes by 2053 through the strategy. And it's important to flag that we've done that because of specific market and uncertainties in terms of realising intensification over a 30-year period. Generally, intensification takes a lot longer to come on stream, but also because of delivery uncertainties around some of our greenfield locations due to kind of limited landowner and developers involved in those opportunities. But also to bear in mind that a strategy is flexible, and that a large part of, I suppose, what at least 50% of that greenfield land that we've identified, we've signalled to come on stream in the latter part of the strategy, which is around 2030. But we've got the flexibility of bringing it forward if we're not seeing intensification take place. So just quickly, in terms of how we split this 12,300 homes, 7,000 homes, about 57% would be delivered within our existing urban footprint, which is our existing urban area, and this is where the intensification plan change obviously enables a significant portion of that. The rest of that, which is 43%, is greenfield, noting that our existing greenfield takes up 14% of that, and that existing greenfield is Pukehangi and Wharenui Rise. So that's our split in terms of capacity. But it's also important to note, how is it capacity distributed? And we're talking about new homes when we talk about capacity, but how is it distributed across our city? So we're looking at just over 3,000 homes in Nangataia, which is about 26% of the capacity. A further 36% in Westside, 4,450 homes. 1,350 homes in the central area, and then 3,350 homes out in East Side. So this just really shows you a spread. Don't take too much away from the numbers there, because obviously each of those areas are spatially different. So I think just in terms of quickly zooming down now into each of those spatial localities, which gives you a clearer sense of what the strategy is trying to achieve. I'm going to sort of just step you through quickly each of those areas. So in terms of Nangataia, if we look at the short to medium term, which is 3 to 10 years, we're looking at enabling, I suppose, significant residential development north of Stembridge Road, which is that green circle, the first green circle from the bottom up, and then in and around Break Road, and also around Nangataia Road as well, which is those green circles. So that's our short-term residential provision, which allows for a more competitive greenfield market when this comes on stream. In the medium term, we're looking at a locality south of Dalbeth Road, medium term being sort of 10 to 30-year picture, and in the long term, which is south of Leonard Road, a key location there for bringing on residential. And obviously this will be monitored over time in terms of when we bring those, whether we bring some of those developed locations forward or back, depending on where we're seeing intensification. But in terms of intensification for Nangataia, it's important that we signal intensification in and around that mauve dot in the middle, which is the town centre. And we incentivise, as I mentioned, the relocation of industrial out of that centre, which is that orange area, to the south of Ngātae. In terms of business, just leading on from what I was saying earlier, we've therefore identified a location at the nexus of State Highway 36 and State Highway 5 as greenfield business opportunity, and hopefully that will incentivise the relocation of business or industrial activity, if you like, that's sitting awkwardly in the current town centre of Ngātae. And in the longer term, we're looking at, as I mentioned earlier, Ngātae being a key gateway, looking at providing for, I guess, tourist/commercial activity to the south of State Highway 5. East side, which is another key growth location. In the short, medium term, we've identified residential development, greenfield residential development around Owhara Lakefront. But it's important to mention the fact that obviously we're seeing delivery of, I suppose, our existing greenfield location in Wharenui Rise, which I think is around 1,000 homes when it's fully built out. So that's the short-term picture. In the long term, we've identified further greenfield land, which is north of Wharenui Road and south of G Road, as a key location for future residential development. And in terms of long-term intensification, obviously the shopping area around the sort of Tina Centre becomes quite important for enabling further intensification, noting that it's not only to provide, I suppose, as a key hub for future residential development, but also for future business development around the airport and further north of that. So that leads on to the business picture, where we've identified in that blue circle there, I suppose, that future business land south of Eastgate Business Park and also adjacent to the airport, and then the long-term business land to the west of State Highway 30, leading through to State Highway 33 and obviously accessing the port along State Highway 30. Central is obviously very important in terms of ensuring that our centre enables obviously the intensification that we would like to see in terms of apartments and terraced homes. So the starting point is really what's been proposed for the plan change, which is that high density residential area, our proposed residential 2 area reflected in orange there. And that enables heights up to 19.5 metres. So obviously, hopefully, we'll get apartments and terraced housing over time in that location. But also identified, remember, it's a 20-50-year view, so a 30-year picture, identified naturally future intensification occurring around the Glenholme area, obviously leveraging off Old Taupo Road and Malfroy as a future centre, and then also potentially the race course if it did have to come on stream in the future as a residential area. Obviously, a lot of processes before that ever happened. Then in terms of corridors, I think for the central area, corridors are critical because this is where we expect to see our high density. So to Tanaka Street, that certainly see upgrades in terms of signalling greater pedestrianisation, leveraging of East Street, ensuring we have a strong connection from the lakefront to the central mall. Fenton Street I've mentioned as well. Obviously, we're signalling great residential development along Fenton Street, so that's quite important that we see the relevant upgrades. And then Old Taupo Road is that key connection from the north all the way to Ngātae and then down to the south. So when we see residential development over time, in that we need to obviously see greater, I suppose, upgrades in relation to that road. And then certainly that central corridor connecting the east to the west is also quite important in terms of upgrading, and that's already been, I think, signalled in Wakakotani's plan, so it's important that that's realised over time. I think quite critically, won't spend a lot of time on this, but alongside this is making sure that we expand our existing transport and both from a public transport and active transport perspective networks. So that's your cycling, pedestrian and bus routes, and obviously having greater frequencies. So the red dashed lines are sort of a schematic reflection of the transport routes, and the mauve dashed lines are the cycling network. So very quickly, just in terms of west side, quite importantly, starting with the short-term greenfield or short to medium-term greenfield residential perspective, we've identified land out towards Aquarius Drive, Heritage Farm area, right to the top of your picture in that yellow, sort of solid yellow colour. But critically across west side, it's really ensuring that medium density residential development takes place, which is really that mustard yellow throughout the image. Quite critically, we're expecting, I suppose, through the plan change to see delivery of more duplexes and walk-ups across that broad area. But that does rely, I suppose, quite critically on our bus and transport networks. So just in terms of business, I think a key thing to mention in that blue circle is that what we do want to do is incentivize the relocation of some of the awkwardly located industrial activities that are happening there, like and that sort of where I've got that blue circle. So the broader industrial picture of identifying land elsewhere, both in the Peka block, but also potentially along State Highway 30, would hopefully incentivize the movement of those activities away. So also investment in corridors. So we've mentioned the old Taupo Road, which is State Highway 5, is important, but also in terms of the western picture, Pukehangi Road becomes very important. We know that we've got the Pukehangi development, which is looking at about 750 new homes. So upgrading that road with respect to cycling and transport is critical. And there's an opportunity of joining up the existing bus networks which are identified in the red dotted lines if we upgrade Pukehangi Road. So really that's kind of a whirlwind tour, I guess, of I suppose the FDS strategy. Quite a lot to cover in a short space of time. I think, as JP mentioned, a critical component to this will be the implementation of it. So what we envisaged in terms of those 4 spatial areas is to have priority development plans that would help us implement those actions, and that would form the basis of an implementation plan for the FDS, which would be reviewed on an annual basis as an active, I suppose, roadmap for delivery. But then the FDS itself gets updated every 3 years and a new one developed every 6 years. Then just in terms of process going forward, as a wrap-up, in terms of engagement, prior to public engagement, we're having 4 hui with mana whenua at the moment, and that's to take the FDS to our key partners before it actually goes to the public. And those 4 areas are kind of more or less spatially configured in relation to those areas I took you through. The other key thing will be obviously today's approval of the FDS and the consultation document that goes out to the public. And then following this will be our public process, which is an LGA process. And we've given it 6 weeks. We required 4 weeks, but we've given an extra 2 weeks to engage the public. So it's from the 1st of June to the 14th of July. And then we sort of envisaged, after getting all the submissions, to have our hearings and deliberations in the last week of August. And then hopefully looking at September, October for the actual adoption of the FDS itself.
Councillors, probably just picking up on another piece which is really important for the community and to understand is obviously this is being built off the housing and business capacity assessment that was undertaken. I think it was adopted about a year ago now, and so that has a fairly robust process around looking at how we envisage those projections and population changes. So really that becomes the underpinning projections that sit behind the requirements for the amount of capacity we need. Of course, the minute you start looking into the future, things can change and change quite rapidly, whether it's globally, nationally, or even locally if people make decisions about not developing or certain blocks of land aren't available to develop. So one of the most important things for us going forward is as we move towards those 3 yearly reviews and the 6 yearly rewrites is to make sure we have that monitoring in place. So we need to understand what homes are being built, where, what types of homes, and that's really important for us to understand when we talk with our infrastructure colleagues about where they need to prioritise infrastructure upgrades or where development contribution investment needs to go to ensure that the infrastructure is there in place for development that occurs, but equally to talk to government and to review ourselves about are we getting the outcomes we expected or have things changed. So really that gives us the opportunity at a more regular basis to say, look, if we're not achieving certain outcomes like levels of infill, do we need to bring on some of the greenfield developments sooner? So again, that's some of the adaptive approach we will have to take as we move forward on that 3 yearly, 6 yearly cycle. So I think at this stage, we're happy to answer if any questions.
Thank you, Damon, for that very comprehensive presentation. I think there's probably going to be quite a number of questions out of this. This is a comprehensive piece of work. It's very technical. It's been going on for a long period of time. I'm conscious that it is 11 o'clock. I'm wondering if we just take a short break here for 10 minutes, have a toilet break, grab a cup of tea, and then we'll come back, we'll take questions, and then we'll deal with the notice of motion from Councillor Lee. So if we could reconvene at 11:10. Thank you, councillors.
Not enough, Sandra.
Am I waiting? I see a couple of councillors though.
Trevor's sitting up there.
Just now take questions to Damon and to JP on the future development strategy. So questions, councillors, around the presentation that you've just had. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report, guys. The documents that we were supplied have a little bit more detail, but even then I must admit some of them are quite hard to read. When you blow them up, the words disappear and pixelate. It's called Attachment 6, the draft Nongataha priority area, which I think was up there. The mustard coloured yellow, I think you described it, Damon, as the MDRS area. That extends out to Mokoia Road, and it seems to be connected to Leonard Road, which, pardon me, coffee, is currently not connected. So just for the people of that community, they live there because it's a one-way in, one-way out road, and always has been. So is there a plan for that to actually be connected to Waititi so that Nongataha basically goes all the way through along the lakefront to Keith Road?
Yeah, I think the point of obviously reflecting this as a priority development plan is so that we can address those issues. So I think what I've done is I've flagged at a high level kind of the key road upgrades, which should be along State Highway. But obviously we would need to look at connectivity, particularly with those new land blocks that have been identified. So that'll be the next layer of planning, which is kind of looking at more the structure planning level. This is really signalling at a high level the intent to develop. So it's a key point to pick up that we'll pick up in the more detailed layer of planning.
Right.
And can I just add to that? I suppose one of the things about us having done previously the 2018 spatial plan was that we've tried to stay true to some of the comments we got back from the Nongataha community about the desire to regenerate and redevelop and get a good heart within the community, but equally not to become the northern suburb of Kawaha Point. So that sort of joining up was a big issue for the community. We're separate and we want to keep that separation. So yes, while we come south below the state highway, it's that kind of keeping that separation from the rest of the city so it doesn't just continue on as a suburb.
Right, thank you. Supplementary, just still sticking with the maps. The other one, Attachment 9, which is the draft central priority area plan. You've got a big purple or pink square that says centre enhancements, and that's the corner of Clayton Road and Old Taupo Road, which turns into Ferry Springs Road. Now that land is currently, that's Kotu Corner, isn't it? So you can see New Roads listed as one of the roads behind it or lower than that. But the corner of Clayton and Old Taupo Road, that's the Mitchell family land that's been contaminated for years or not developable. Is there a process to actually make that land usable coming up? Will it cost us anything?
Councillor, we're probably dropping down in level of detail here, so we can happily provide you with some additional information. My recollection has been some work on levels of contamination within that block, and they're not as extensive as the conversations have been in the past. So there is actually some proper work being done in that space. So we can give you some more detail on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, fellas. Great presentation. Couple of questions, if I may. One, if JP, maybe you could speak to the process from here, because we're not making decisions here. So if you could speak to that. And the other one is around environment. We've talked about retreating from downstream effects for stormwater. And yet we don't show in this plan any mitigation or potential environmental enhancement in the upper catchments. I just wonder whether that is out of scope, or is it something that we can include later on, or how will that work?
Just in terms of mitigation, obviously because of the nature of the presentation didn't sort of get into all of that element, but that was quite important. So certainly in each of those area plans, we signalled, for instance, the Utahina stream network, and we've also signalled the network out east side as areas we need to be focusing on from a mitigation point of view, flood mitigation point of view. I suppose the broader catchment approach is part of the implementation plan, and I suppose the good thing is that we're working in a co-governance relationship with regional council. So the devil will be in the detail in terms of how we approach that with regional council, and certainly the thinking is to take a catchment-wide approach to deal with it. So I guess the answer is yes, it's factored in, but we just haven't sort of fleshed out the details in this high-level FDS. That'll be part of the implementation plan.
And probably I look across at Stavros. Obviously, we've received a significant boost through the IAF to invest in stormwater, and that does give us the chance to address some of that detention retention issues, which should help us with that longer term view of some of the flooding risk, or reducing some of that flooding risk. But one of the key things we'll be doing, because there is this jointly responsible around the action plan, is really having a conversation with the regional council, and it's an important one, about what benefit cost interventions we should be considering to make sure we get the best mix of outcomes. Now that's flood reduction, that's water quality issues, there's a whole range of things, and that's going to be a critical part of the implementation phase. If I go back to your first piece here too, which is you've heard, and we've made many technical presentations to the previous council and to this council. For those new councillors coming on, they were in the deep end on a whole bunch of technical information. A huge amount of stakeholder groups involved from a technical perspective as well, to make sure we were following the intent of that national policy statement on urban development. So input from regional council, Waka Kotahi, education, there's a whole range of government departments, plus making sure there was that engagement with mana whenua and iwi entities, particularly where their land holdings are involved. So a lot of that work, plus the preliminary work with the community. But really this has all been to a point of trying to get to, with the 4 options, scenarios that you saw, a preferred one, and obviously that information about those other alternative scenarios. So we got it in a state that it was ready really for the wider community to have their say. So they've got the chance to see the base information that's gone into the projections and identify those areas. So it is probably a repeat of some of the levels of engagement we needed to have when we did the spatial plan back in 2018. And so really the engagement plan now is really focused on trying to get it out to the community. It is very technical in the full document, but the summary document is an attempt to package that down. And certainly through the engagement process, if people only want to talk about their part, we will. So from our perspective, the engagement plan's there. We've had the assistance of the other departments to make sure it's a good plan. But if councillors have any views on additional meetings, additional groups we should be talking to, the team are very keen to accommodate that, to make sure we get the best out of this engagement process.
Thank you. Councillor Waru.
No, actually, Madam Chair, I'll take that back now, because JP just answered the question that I was going to ask about the engagement. So it seems that has been quite extensive. And kia kahara. I might have another question though coming up if the kōrero goes. Kia ora.
Wait for later. Thank you. Mayor Tetzel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Thank you very much for your presentation. At the start of this term, this council made a decision that signalled a really strong desire to the community that green spaces are important to us and should be protected. I understand that the scope of the future development strategy is aligned with the national policy statement, but has it taken into account, as we continue to grow either in residential, commercial, industrial, that these green spaces will continue to be important, but also the need for more? And then second question, when we talk about the medium density or the need for further residential, is that looking at currently privately owned or residential green spaces and not public green spaces as opportunities for housing or commercial development? Just to provide reassurance to the community, it's been a hot topic, but it's not necessarily clear in the FDS as it is.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. Well-functioning communities have good public spaces. We've talked about public transport, but certainly I think Rob Kethley's here in the room, so the Sport and Rec team and in their planning are very keen to make sure they get an understanding of where the growth potential is, including intensification, because it really does lend itself to where they should be looking at acquiring, developing and enhancing reserves, which is an important part of making sure there's a well-functioning community. So yes, that's a critical piece. I wasn't quite sure on the comment about private pieces.
As opposed to looking at public spaces for changing the land use from reserves to the residential or commercial or light industrial.
So we hadn't gone into that level of detail yet. So what we did do is we worked with Rob's team, I guess, in terms of making sure that we interfaced with the open space network plan that they're working on. And what we did was we identified, regardless of whether it's private or public, we've just identified indicative locations for new open space, and the key word being indicative, which we'll then need to investigate further in terms of whether those locations would be suitable. Just remember, this is kind of a strategy at this stage. It's just that identifying at a catchment level where we would need to identify that open space. The next layer would then need to interrogate the actual sites themselves. So but I think also it's probably worth mentioning schooling and education as well, working closely with the MOE, and certainly we'd need to potentially, with this level of growth, flag potentially new school in Nangataha Primary School, and also looking at east side and west side. So it's also looking at the other amenities as well, and we've sort of flagged that through the strategy.
And probably I would just come back to, against our current service level around reserve provision, neighbourhood reserves. During the reserves process, we identified there was a couple of areas where there was a deficit. So that was out east. There was, that's that walking distance to a reserve for particular community catchments. So there was a gap out east, and certainly within the northern part of Glenholm, there was a similar gap in that area. So one of those areas, it becomes more of a challenge because of already being built up areas. So that becomes a problem then of acquisition. If we were to look at putting a neighbourhood reserve, for example, in that northern part of Glenholm, it would probably have to be seeking to purchase a home or homes to take them out, so we can put some a reserve space in there. So again, we've got to see where the development goes, but that's sort of also highlights that service level is not even across the city. So whilst we're also looking at growth, we also have to start thinking about how the network functions well.
And I think our CE has a comment to make as well.
Thank you. Through the Chair. Councillors, if I may, I think one of the challenges with this particular strategy is that it's a direction-setting piece of work. So where will the city grow? How will it grow? Where will be the key areas where growth will take place? What will that growth look like overall? So it's very much a concept or a direction, the concept of a new direction for Rotorua. The challenge that we've got is without direction, all of those answers or questions about where will roads go, where will schools be, how will people move across the city, where will they access work from? So there's a huge amount of detail that needs to follow, but that is all about implementation. So once you've got direction, you can then start planning the implications of that direction in terms of our infrastructure, in terms of our reserve network, in terms of our where will people play, in terms of sport, because all of those things are dependent on understanding the direction that the city's actually moving in. If you don't have clarity about which way the city's going to grow, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to set up effective strategies. For example, a sports field strategy to say, well, where do we need new future sports fields? Because the first thing that you need to know is, so where will growth happen? So it's a little bit frustrating, I think, because I think you will find people will want to ask those detailed questions. So what does this mean about? The key discussion here is we first need to understand where are we overall trying to go, and if we get agreement from our community about the overall direction, then we can start doing those supplementary pieces of work around sports fields, around education, around roading, around stormwater mitigation, because all of those things then naturally flow out as implications of that overall direction.
Thank you, Jeff, for that. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you guys for the presentation and the significant amount of work that's gone into this process so far, which admittedly as a new councillor I didn't see a lot of that, and so coming in has been quite the learning curve. This is a question following on from Councillor Brown's about the consultation process really. I note that this is a guide to our district and its development and growth going forward, so it's really important that the whole district's involved in the conversation. Yes, it gives effect to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, but I note that our district is largely made up of other compositions, including rural and forestry. So my question is that there's obviously not a lot of reference made to rural or forestry or those types of industries in this document. Can the rural community and other interests give their feedback, and how will they do so if it's not actually mentioned in the document, please?
I think it goes to, this is not restricted to an urban engagement process. This is our whole district. You know, the city is the heart of our district. But certainly everyone's views and submissions will need to be collated into this process. And I think probably goes to my earlier answer as well, is if you believe there's a view of how we tailor this to make sure we get better engagement and those views from those other communities, that will be hugely valuable to us. So, you know, if there's a need to go to Rewhakaitu to have a community discussion out there, more than happy to work with the community boards to make sure we are on point about what are the key issues they want to talk about, so that they can usefully contribute into this process with their own views as well. So yeah, look forward to that discussion if you'd like to help us modify or expand our engagement plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Waru, I think you had a question now.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Yes, I do. Around in the plan you mentioned moving in industry or industrial kaupapa to other places, like Peka, for instance. And one of those places is Ngāpuna. Now, if that was to happen, say in this plan, and eventually it did happen, which I hope it does, what then would that area be used for or zoned for?
So just on that, I mean, firstly, obviously we can't really force business to move. I suppose we can create alternatives that are more attractive, and that's the intention. But the idea would be that would shift to more complementary uses, like a lighter industrial or commercial, preferably, I suppose, commercial over time, to support, that would fit better with, I suppose, the interface with that residential area. So could be a business park or kind of commercial activity within that location. I mean, that's the desired state anyway.
Yeah, and I think the key here is to remember, even if we go through a process of saying, okay, within this, it's agreed that we need to change from a heavy industrial or industrial zoning to something lighter, all those businesses within there have existing use rights. So it does become almost a decision to choose to move or relinquish their existing use rights and move to a different activity. So I think there's almost we have to create the right market opportunities for people to see alternative sites, create the value in those kind of areas that justify exiting or seeing the point in moving and changing. So again, that's part of that development of that area. I think the certainty around the roading has changed a lot of people's understanding of what the future of that of the areas that interface directly onto the state highway is. And I suppose we've gradually seen that change over time, haven't we? We've seen a couple of industrial sites turn into a car dealership or motion entertainment and things like that. So there is a lightening that's going into that area. But as we've signalled to you previously through our HBA, there is a shortage of industrial zoned land and the business parks with the right sort of focus to ensure there's some alternatives so people can choose to relocate or redevelop in different locations. So that's going to be a critical part of the strategy moving forward.
Thank you, JP and Damon. And just going back to also the engagement, I know it was quite extensive, and I'm glad you've touched on that too, because I received a lot of your emails there, Damon, a lot of them, many of them. And so I just want to congratulate you on that and your team. However, last little part, the smart growth plan towards, I believe, Tauranga, Te Puke, Paengaroa, Whakatane, the worst kept secret. Has this plan taken into account the connectivity and the growth that's expected to happen over there as well?
Yeah, I think to an extent. I mentioned State Highway 30 as being the key corridor. So, I mean, I suppose business certainly signalled in all our engagements that if they had to relocate, they would want to relocate along that corridor. Certainly, in terms of smart growth, we did engage them and they provided us what they had at this stage in terms of that kind of eastern picture of growth. So we just, I mean, all we could really signal in this strategy is just ensuring that we make sure that that corridor functions well with respect to freight, but also making sure that we signal business growth along that corridor, because I think being proximate to that value chain that links up to the port would naturally make sense if you're proposing growth along that corridor. So at this stage, with that still being sort of concepts, that's all we could really do with respect to the FDS. There wasn't anything concrete in terms of plans coming out of smart growth at this stage.
Oh no, but I'm glad to hear that it's in the thinking. That's the main thing, because that's actually going to be having a huge impact on how we work here in Rotorua too. Tauranga, Rotorua, Whakatane, that triangle is going to be huge. So I'm glad the thinking's actually in there anyway. Maybe
on that, I think just in our role, I suppose, in co-governance with regional council, they're the key agency, I guess, that are inextricably linked to smart growth. So I suppose all the intel and information with respect to smart growth will naturally feed into our implementation plan, because they're sitting in the same table, regional council. So we'll be relying on them to obviously update us with respect to any developments in that regard.
Amihi, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got one question which just follows on from that. So because we've got a recommendation coming up shortly, could you just quickly outline just the role of the regional council while they're now at the table and the independent hearings panel with an independent chair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we've communicated this obviously through briefings to you, but one of the requirements under that National Policy Statement of Urban Development is it does require, it names that we've talked about Tier 1 and Tier 2 councils, so we're a medium growth or a Tier 2 council. In the development around future development strategies, because of that need for integrated decision making, that National Policy Statement names the regional councils as well, and names their joint responsibility in producing and agreeing to an FTS. So we've developed this with a lot of regional council input to date, but from a governance level, it hasn't been as high a profile for them as it certainly has for us. And so really the step going forward now is to say, well, how do we make sure that jointly responsible alignment is there? So that's why the proposal around a joint committee with members from obviously our council and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council is quite critical. Because of the amount of, so whilst we're consulting on the FDS or Future Development Strategy under the Special Consultative Procedure of the Local Government Act, it's still a really important document for us for its RMA guidance as well. So RMA guidance and also that joint infrastructure planning piece that's important part of this as well. So on that basis, we also thought we really did need this experience and skills of an RMA commissioner. And I've talked about how this is an integrated package. So that was why we proposed to have an RMA commissioner act as a chair, as an independent chair to work with both councils, but also to make sure we had that RMA commissioner lens across what is a strategic document for us, but does give some direction for us into the RMA space and recognises where it interfaces with the intensification plan change and other plan changes moving forward. So that's why we've got to this point. It's really, we think it's really useful then that both councils come together, particularly during that hearing phase, so receive submissions, collectively hear those views, because when we start getting down to that implementation, we need our champions to come back from that joint committee into council so we can sign off the document, but also make sure that from an infrastructure investment perspective, it lines up with our LTPs. So that's really why we've got that sort of framework in place and that approach being put forward.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through the Chair, I have two lines of inquiry I'd like to pursue with you, if I may. First of all, how much has central government influenced the Future Development Strategy?
They have looked, so we've talked about how we have a technical advisory group. So Damon's got a number of structures that have assisted us in making sure government departments are aware of things like the housing business assessment. So they understand the growth direction and the projections that have been put in place. Clearly that has implications around the core activities for many government departments. So coming to those technical advisory groups representatives of, for example, Waka Kotahi. So Waka Kotahi has major highways that travel through our city. So where we've cited areas for potential growth based on constraints, so a whole bunch of our work, they have a particular interest in understanding it. Also, it goes to their wider Bay of Plenty regional perspective. So all of the government agencies have been interested in where we got to with our housing and business assessment, B, what the constraints, modelling and research being done by Damon and the team had identified as the potential greenfield and infill areas. And then obviously those government departments have a particular perspective based on their focus to understand. So for something again like Ministry of Education, greenfield areas are intensely important and of interest to them because that generally means potential for new schools. And equally, even when we're talking about infill numbers and the scale of infill, they're intensely interested in the capacity of the existing schools to absorb that. So certainly from a Ministry of Education perspective, within their particular kaupapa, very, very interested in the specific implications. So hopefully that answers the question. They're more a case of understanding the research and the objectives they have as an agency and how that interfaces with the planning we've done.
So,
I think one other aspect is the policy framework.
Yes.
So the NPSUD sets out a policy framework for delivery, which is really driving us towards more compact, efficient urban form more than anything. So obviously we give effect to that, but I think just obviously adding just to what JP was saying, we had 9 sessions with the technical advisory group, which comprised those central government departments to test thinking with them. So they had input along the way in terms of developing this as opposed to coming in at the end.
So central government have taken an interest in this. We met up last week, of course, and you mentioned that central government asked you to be ambitious with your forecasts. Is that correct?
Didn't ask us to be ambitious. I guess there are 2 points at play here. I suppose there's the pulling back factor, saying, look, the policy actually says we should effectively be less ambitious, I guess, with our thinking in terms of having a more compact urban form. But I think the other tension...
Ambitious in terms of growth, sorry.
Well, in terms of growth, yeah. So the NPS talks about delivering compact urban form, which is really looking at your existing infrastructure and leveraging off existing infrastructure. But the other tension is obviously providing sufficient growth to allow for a competitive housing market. And that came through, obviously, discussions with other departments, such as MHUD, that want to see housing delivery, like ourselves as well. So it's trying to marry that tension. And I think, as JP said earlier, is that effectively build the strategy to its maximum, and you then are able to pull back based on monitoring. You want to have, and I guess our CEO also outlined that as well, you want to have the big picture in terms of what delivery could look like if growth continues at its current trend, but then have the ability to pull back on that. And the strategy allows you to do that.
Can I, and probably is worth teasing out, Councillor, I think there's a value in your question. There's also the piece that we brought to the table within our housing and business assessment, which is we've had an acute housing need. So as a council, we saw something like a population increase of almost 8,000 or over 8,000 over the last since 2013. We've only seen 1,600 building consents come through in that period. So the government's place-based assessment, so the research they did, and then the work we did within the HBA identified a shortage of homes, as well as a problem with the mix of our homes, so the typology. So we're very much, because of our planning rules, have historically had single dwellings on large sections, 3 to 4 bedrooms, very little of the other housing types that we need as a changing and growing community. I make the emphasis there on changing and growing. It's critical. So the government's perspective is, and some of those agencies, when they come and go, look, from a climate perspective and from a good urban form, go up, not out. And that's all great from a theoretical perspective, but that does not address the fact that we've already had our house prices more than double, our rents double, and the fact that we've got huge amounts of housing pressure now. And you try and translate that forward as to say, well, okay, if you're going to get that density, our housing prices and our values have to go even higher before the economics of building up start to really work. So that's kind of this tension between a pure policy perspective and the realities of our community and the realities of economics of building. So when you start taking that in line and saying, hey, we've got an affordability crisis as much as anything else, we have to strike a balance. And that's part of those discussions we've had. So the level of greenfield does not perfectly align with the intent of some agencies, which would say go up, not out. But it is that necessity to say, actually, we need to take a more balanced approach in the short and medium term to make sure we don't lose affordability and we do actually are able to produce homes that people want. So that is part of that tension in those discussions.
So in order to be conservative, we've earmarked 50% of that greenfield land to become on stream only in 2030, which is a long term from now. So we've specifically flagged it for a long-term solution.
Gentlemen, I don't want to test the patience of my chair. I do have a few issues to get through. We don't need the presentation restated, but this is the housing and business capacity assessment, and this is the crystal ball upon which we're relying, right?
Correct.
Yes. So, and the technical document, which kind of qualifies some of the crystal ball gazing to some degree. I was surprised to see in the executive summary that it says, according to previous research though, there is a current housing shortfall of about 1,500 houses, maybe up to 1,700 houses. It doesn't refer to the research that's relied on in this, but through some digging through the technical document, we end up with this document, which I think you're familiar with. This is the basis of the crystal ball gazing, yes?
So just for clarity, are you referring to the place-based assessment that
Yes.
Housing and Urban Development did? Yep.
Yes. And I'd just like you to respond to one statement in here which says that any measure is highly sensitive to start dates. If measured from the 2006 census, there would be no Rotorua shortfall, as occupancy rates across the district are similar to 2018.
I suppose you've asked for brevity in our responses. I would say that is a document that was superseded when we completed our housing and business assessment. So again, we've picked up on the most up-to-date Stats New Zealand projections and our infometrics work. So that was the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development making an assessment at a point in time, correct? We've completed our housing and business assessment as robustly as we possibly could. And as you're aware, and correctly say, it is forecasting. The key issue here is the requirement around capacity. So we need to make sure we're identifying potential capacity. If there's a change and we see changes on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis from a whole bunch of national and international factors, we don't know what the future is. We can only look at what we monitor on a quarterly basis and ensure we have sufficient capacity.
Thank you. If I may just pursue now the second line of my inquiry.
How many questions have you got, Councillor Lee? I think everyone
I'll be swift. I just, as long as I need the respondents to be swift, and we should get through it rather quickly, ma'am.
Perhaps if you could just put your questions pretty succinctly, I think we
I'll
need to
do
move
my
on
best,
and
yes.
allow others the opportunity.
So can you tell us, please, the process that Council adopted for the benefit of the public to bring MDRS, medium density residential standards to Rotorua?
Councillor Lee, just we are talking about the future development strategy here. I think we'll just concentrate our questions on the presentation and the future development strategy at this point.
Madam Chair,
we are coming to your notice of motion, so
yes, sure.
We'll deal with that and we'll take questions at this stage on the future development strategy. So if you have no further questions on the development strategy, I'll ask if Councillor Patterson would like to ask his questions.
Madam Chair, if I may respond and exercise my right of reply, the future development strategy is proposing that 7,000 out of 10,000 houses will be built within the current footprint of the Rotorua district, and that will be on the basis of medium density residential standards. So this is very much an integral part of the discussion about the future development strategy. And I think it's important that the public understand how this council came about adopting medium density residential standards.
Point of order, Madam Chair. The irrelevance to the subject that we're discussing at the moment.
Councillor, I've asked that we move on in terms of that. Let's just deal with the questions here. If I can just finish questions here, we'll then deal with the medium density residential standards notice of motion, and we can take questions at that point. So, Councillor Patterson, did you have a question around this topic?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just going back on comments made by Chief Executive and our wonderful Mayor regarding the green spaces and particular sports fields, my understanding is that for the last 18 months, Rob's team has been working very hard on the Play, Active Recreation and Sport Plan. Now, if we're making decisions based on information that we have access to, which is always a good way to make decisions, that particular plan has already been out and done research with the community about what their needs are. Can I ask, has your team already had access to that information, or are we still waiting for that to come through?
No, totally. Yeah. So the whole process had involved them through. Fortunately, they were developing it at the same time. So I suppose the processes merged in terms of the FDS, but important to note that I guess it plugs in at the more detailed end of the FDS. So what my previous answer was really we used that information to identify indicative locations and to identify where the key deficit areas are to inform where those indicative locations are. And I think we'll be continuing to work with Rob's team in the actual implementation phase when we now then start identifying specific sites. So the short answer is yes, they have been plugged into the process.
Right.
And can I just add, and as does the infrastructure team, so Stavros's team. So the other parts of this organisation are critically interested in what they need to be planning to do going forward. So for Stavros, that's the 30-year infrastructure strategy that should come off the back of this. So it does detail where that growth is. Certainly it then leads into the long-term plan process critically as well, because part of that will also be a funding question. So if we're identifying new growth areas, and if that proceeds through that community consultation into the final document, that's critically important for Thomas then to understand if there's new infrastructures needed in Ofota or Nongataha, what is that infrastructure and what's the split between development and the existing ratepayers. So that's where the development contributions policy and our funding plans would have to pick that up. So yes, Councillor, critically important. All eyes are on this because it does drive that next level of detail we need as a council.
Thank you. So will we actually all get to see that information to help us make our decision about this?
Yes. I presume it's just, my answer was a bit slow there, but mainly because you just need to understand the overall picture of how those pieces fit together. So yes, and there are some philosophical decisions leading into those strategies that you'll need to pick up from this work, yes.
Very good, thank you.
Well, thank you, councillors. I think we've had a good round of discussions, and also remembering, councillors, we did have a very extensive briefing 2 weeks ago because I realised that this was a very technical piece of work. It was a piece of work that had been going on for quite some time. So, councillors, you have had quite a lot of opportunity. We've had several briefing sessions around this to bring you up to speed. So I think that if we can draw this part of the agenda to a close, I'm just going to ask staff if you could just stay there for the moment, JP and Damon, while we deal with the notice of motion. I'm now going to move to the notice of motion that I have received from Councillor Lee. Councillors, that's been uploaded into Stella for your information. Effectively, the recommendation that you're seeking, Councillor Lee, is that you wish to move that section 4.2.1 be replaced with the above wording which you've got in your extensive notice of motion for public consultations so that they can be properly informed as to how MDRS came to be adopted in Rotorua and to provide the community with their first opportunity to be consulted on whether or not they support the change. So do I have I've got a mover for that motion, which is yourself, Councillor Lee. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Patterson, thank you. Councillor Lee, as you are now the mover of the motion, in terms of our normal standing orders, as the mover you have 5 minutes to speak to it, so over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, medium density residential standards is a significant change to the Rotorua skyline. It would be. It's very important that we consider how it is that this change to Rotorua's planning arrangements took place. So the background to it is that on the 25th of November 2021, the previous council made a decision in a confidential session of council to ask central government if Rotorua could be included with other Tier 1 councils, the other Tier 1 councils, and be asked by central government to implement medium density residential standards here. So Rotorua council is a Tier 2 council, along with New Plymouth, Palmerston North, Whangarei, Napier, etc. And Rotorua was the only council that asked central government if we could please opt in to medium density residential standards. Even among the Tier 1 councils, medium MDRS is controversial. Hamilton Council have taken steps to minimise its effect in Hamilton. They have some really excellent planning things that are happening over there. Christchurch Council also refused to implement MDRS in the first instance prior to the election. The infill of 7,000 properties, which is what's anticipated in the future development strategy, is a massive change for Rotorua, a significant change, and in my view should have invoked the significance and engagement policy back in 2021. However, as the time, this was a change that the central government made rather on a short time frame, and so our council had already made a submission to the relevant select committee seeking for Rotorua to be part of MDRS. So the decision made in confidential was actually a retrospective approval of what council's submission to the select committee was. So the public were not told about it at the time, and it wasn't until 15th of March 2022 that a public announcement was made by the council that MDRS is here to stay, and aren't you lucky, Rotorua? So in the normal course of planning, the public would be invited to feed back to the council on significant plan changes that affect them. So what my notice of motion seeks to do is inform the public as to how MDRS came to be in Rotorua without public consultation, and it seeks to set that right and to invite the public to consider whether MDRS is a good move for Rotorua or whether it's not. And if the public wish to feed back to us that actually then they don't want 7,000 houses infilled with 3 dwellings, 3 stories high on an average Rotorua property, then the public should be invited to do that, in my view. So I see this as an opportunity for this council to engage in authentic consultation with the community. I think the current draft that we're looking to put out for public consultation is, shall we say, economical with the truth. I think there's more information that could be provided. So far as my notice of motion is concerned, I did use the word replace the relevant portion of the future development strategy. I have no objection to the existing text staying in there, so I'm only really seeking to provide the community with more information, not less. And I also wouldn't object to council providing yet further information, perhaps in response to the text that I have proposed and drafted. I therefore conclude my presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Because I had formal notice of the notice of motion that was going to be tabled, and it was tabled in time, I've asked the staff, as is usual, to overview the notice of motion just to give us some advice on it. So, JP, I wondered if you could speak to the information that was provided in the notice of motion by Councillor Lee, which is in the papers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think Councillor Lee has touched on a couple of the issues that I think were of concern from us as a staff perspective within the notice of motion. So I just jotted down some bullet points. I just thought I would make sure we covered off. And so I think I appreciate the comment that Councillor Lee made about the modification of a staff report. Obviously, we have a process where the staff write reports. Those are signed off by their line manager, and in this case it was Damon to me, to the Chief Executive, so that they are staff reports. So I was concerned when I first read the notice of motion suggesting we amend a staff report. So that's nice that that's not part of that discussion. The notice of motion and reading it, that there is some points I did have some concerns over. They weren't completely accurate or correct, so in effect they could be seen as slightly misleading for a member of the public reading it. For example, things like assessment of infrastructure. Clearly all the way along we're talking to our infrastructure team who have and constantly assess the potential growth within down to even mesh block level where potential infill or development would occur. So from an engineering perspective, we have a detailed assessment of what the implications from infrastructure would be. So again, that reference within the document is not correct. Council is absolutely correct about the difference between a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 council. I suppose what is omitted from that statement is that it's not just the large metros. It also includes a number of other adjoining local authorities. So 14 local authorities are affected under Tier 1 and so have the MDRS applied to them. So 14 councils out of the 67 in New Zealand, and we obviously became the 15th. So just by way of example, Wellington City is Tier 1, but the MDRS applies to Lower Hutt, Upper Hutt, Rotorua and Kapiti Coast councils as well. Within the Bay of Plenty, other than ourselves having joined under the MDRS, it also applies to Western Bays and Tauranga City, and around Hamilton it also applies to Waipa and at least one other council joining the greater Hamilton area. So yes, the standards do apply to more than just the 5 key metros. It's 14 councils. So I think picking up on the councillors' other issues there, and I've just tried to just sort of in my head structure some of this request. So one of the things is we never got the choice of being part of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. So that was a government decision to determine what councils were Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3. And equally the provisions that say this is your timetable to put in place a number of plan changes, intensification, the removal of parking requirements and the development requirements around the FDS are all laid out in that national policy statement. Cross-government, there was another concern about the speed and the effects on urban planning of a number of councils' rules. So they put forward an amendment bill which we received in, I think it was early November. So at that time we were starting to look at our responsibilities around how we were going to discharge the requirements under the National Policy Statement. So there was a conversation with Council about the pressures we were experiencing, so that referred to some of the initial research of the Housing and Business Assessment and the HUD place-based assessment. We also spent some time detailing to our Council the mismatch between our rules and many of the other councils' rules across the country. So we've got some of the tightest development rules in our residential one in the country. So we produced a sheet here which compared us to all of the other councils within that Tier 2 space, and we had the most restrictive planning rules and standards in our district plan. We'd already had the discussion with our council at that time, so again, this is yourselves, that this was one of the most significant barriers to development within the city, and one of the reasons why the government was citing that we had not seen a wider availability of homes within our urban area. So we were relying on greenfield and we were not getting the kind of infill that we should have been seeing in a changing community. So this is that comment about missing middle. So our rules were not supportive of providing a granny flat or intergenerational housing choices. They were not supportive of providing duplexes or terrace homes, or at the other end of the extreme, the 3 houses, 3 levels on a site. So it was that full spectrum of the middle housing type that we did not have. So we had provisions for high density, and we had provisions for low density residential across our city. So those were one of those critical issues that we put forward in the council's submission to the bill. The council decided at that time they wanted to request that Rotorua Lakes Council be included within the medium density residential standards because of the gap around our current rules and our housing deficit. So that was that request. So that went to that select committee. We were not included. So the response we received from central government was, thank you for your submission, but we're applying this to the Tier 1 councils. But the legislation change gave the opportunity for government to impose that medium density residential standard where there was an acute housing need. So the request came back to council to say, do you want us to assess whether you have an acute housing need? And based on that submission, that request was made to government. So they made that assessment, and as the councillor has reported, that came back as saying, yes, you do have an acute housing need, and through that order in council, we will include you within the medium density residential standards, which is the intent of that piece of legislation. So I suppose my next kind of statement from the councillor's comments was that has been telegraphed and communicated to our community through all of the engagement. So I've referred to the processes we have run over the last year in preparing for Plan Change 9, the intensification plan change, and equally the FDS. So we've communicated to the community at all of those opportunities that MDRS had come into effect through that order in council and would have legal effect from the 20th of August, I think it was, of last year. So as a consequence, of course, we've actually received submissions referring to it, and those submissions are saying, please don't be in it. So there is a number of submissions that have gone through Plan Change 9 process and will be dealt with by our hearing commissioners in August. One of the outcomes of including the MDRS, and this is my second to last bullet point, is that gave us some certainty around a body of rules. So if we had not had a decision made by government around our acute housing needs, and if we had not had the order in council to have those standards in place, Plan Change 9, our intensification plan change, would have had to include a significant raft of additional rules to try and lift that flexibility for our community. So MDRS gives us a number of standards. It does not automatically say you can go to 3 stories and 3 homes. It gives you a whole bunch of standards you must comply with to have a permitted status, and therefore save the community member consent fees, and they can go straight to the building consent process. But that does require the compliance with a number of those other rules. So that certainty has also been really important for us in making sure that that defined the scope and the potential across the city for infill housing, but it is not the only piece of the 7,000 homes. We also have in Plan Change 9 a number of high density areas that have been increased. So that's the city centre, what used to be our old medium density zone, which extended out to approximately Malfroy, and also the Fenton Street corridor. So there's a number of additional areas that actually move to high density. So there is additional areas other than the MDRS contribution to the 7,000 potential homes. The other part of this was it also enabled us in parallel to actually start saying, actually, we know one of the potential impacts for the city, that there is a capacity to do additional infill. We know what those rules are. That enabled Stavros and our team to work effectively around saying, what is the infrastructure deficits required to assist this, which enabled us to put in an application to the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund. So that certainty was quite critical to us to enable that investment potential with that application to government. So this has travelled in parallel, but obviously it reduced the scope of what Plan Change 9 needed to be, but it also gave an underpinning set of, I suppose, decisions and rules which enabled us to do the modelling around the FDS. So a critical sort of step for us to get ahead of that planning framework. So I've talked there about that saving us a significant amount of additional rule changes that would have had to have been built into Plan Change 9, and correspondingly a significant amount of time spent by staff with consultants preparing those and the cost. So it was a way for us to take our outdated rules and quickly move them to a new standard set without having to go through the additional cost of preparing that plan change and the uncertainty of that process, considering we had a housing deficit. So I suppose in just coming to the conclusion here, a decision to try and consult about undoing MDRS. So again, we didn't make the decision in the end. So the government, having requested the government assess us, they assessed us, and through that order in council, placed us through that piece of legislation within the MDRS. That has given us an underpinning for our Plan Change 9 framework, so we didn't have to do as much as we expected to do, and it also has given some certainty about where we're going with the FDS. So a decision to consult, whichever way that would go, actually is not a decision for us. So if we did consult and said, hey, we're not interested, we're not actually the decision maker to undo it or change it. That is government. And I would point out then that the consequence of that is that we would have failed to meet the timelines for an effective intensification plan change. So we're working towards that currently, and we need to complete it by March of next year. So by removing MDRS, if that was the outcome that government chose to do, we would probably then have to immediately go into an additional plan change, which would probably take us 2+ years to complete, and would probably involve $1 million plus of work in that space. So that's our rule of thumb of how long a plan change takes, and so significant amount of cost and significant amount of time, and we would have missed the opportunity to ensure we had some certainty also going into the FDS discussion, which has been an additional process. And finally, the last piece there was the implications around us having no certainty carrying forward into our long-term plan. So again, the piece here is a council made a decision to request an assessment that was undertaken, and a decision was made by government. That has given us certainty for planning over the last year. And so a decision to decide whether we should seek to continue or remove it actually has some knock-on effects to our ability to be prepared for housing growth and development in the city. So I suppose that was just my initial response as councillors. I'm sure there'll be further discussion and questions from here.
Thank you, JP.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, sorry, point of order. Can I just raise, sorry, and I appreciate Councillor Lee's motion. The issue that Mr Gaston brought up about this being a staff report, it was moved by Councillor Lee that it would be received. I understand, and I've read the motion several times. Given the recommendations on page 31, are we seeking to amend or replace those recommendations? And if so, which ones? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry, are you asking if Councillor Lee is wishing to amend his motion?
Well, sorry, just that he moved that the staff report be received, which we voted yes for. Sorry.
He moved his motion. So to be able to, he moved the motion that he had put up, which was that section 4.2.1 be replaced.
Thank you, Madam Chair, but I think he also moved that the report be received as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm seeking, sorry, I just want clarification. Is Councillor Lee seeking to amend one of these recommendations or replace, or are the recommendations going ahead for, thank you.
I think, Councillor, you're seeking to add this additional clause your additional information into the FDS to replace the current 4.2.1. That is how I've taken your notice of motion, and that the other notices of motion that we're coming to deal with in relation to the FDS will be dealt with separately. We're just dealing with this issue here with the replacement of some additional wording at this stage.
May I perhaps respond to Councillor O'Brien's question?
For clarification.
For clarification, yes. I think Mr Gaston was correct that my motion wrongly targeted the staff report. The intention of my notice of motion was to provide the public in the FDS consultation document with the information that I provided in the notice of motion. Obviously, I agree with Mr Gaston that I can't be amending a staff report.
No, and that is what your notice of motion effectively is seeking.
So that would need to be amended. You're right.
And unfortunately, we have a notice of motion that's on the table. It's been moved and seconded at this stage, so I'm not able to take any amendment to that. I think I'll just take any further questions by way of clarification at this point, and then I'm going to put the motion as it is. So are there any further questions in relation to that notice of motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'd just like to signal that if this motion is lost, I would then like to move an amendment to my notice of motion so that it would then apply to the future development strategy draft rather than to the staff report.
At this stage, Councillor Lee, just give me a minute to just take some advice from the staff here.
Oh, okay. Just a point of clarification, Madam Chair. I wasn't aware that you could actually amend
That's what I was just getting my confirmation of my advice on. So at this stage, what we have is we have a motion on the table. We've got no further questions as I take it. So we can have a round of discussion on this. We've heard from Councillor Lee as the mover. Councillor Patterson as the seconder. Do you wish to speak to this motion?
Yes, Madam Chair, I do. Do I get the opportunity to speak last, being the seconder?
That's the right of reply for the mover, so unless Councillor Lee wishes to defer to you.
Well, I'll get the ball rolling then. Thank you very much. Thank you for your feedback on this, and very well put together with plenty of time, obviously. I guess the reason that I'm concerned about this is not so much MDRS itself. I can see from all of the many meetings and many conversations we've had about this, I understand the housing shortfall that we have. I understand all of that. My concern is that initial decision back in the day that asked for this to happen in the first place without asking our people first. That's all. That's the problem, that a decision was made by the previous council to circumvent the significance and engagement policy. That's all it is. And all I would like to see is for the people to then have their say. Now, one thing that you recall from one of the reserves hui that you spoke at, JP, you made a really good point. You said at that time that to the current council of the day, that consultation is not a referendum, that the information you get from the community is to help you make an informed decision on the future. Now, the trouble with this particular issue is that the people weren't given that opportunity to have feedback. The council of the day could very well have gone, thanks very much, we've taken into account your comments. However, it's in our best judgment for the good of this community that we need to be involved in MDRS and move ahead. But that step was missed out. Now, I understand that could have been one of those pressures with time, because time was moving, these things needed to be done because they've all got deadlines to meet. But this is a democracy. You know, that's one of the key cornerstones. We don't muck around with the key cornerstone of our city, our culture, our country is based on democracy. And that one misstep, whether it was an error or it was one of those pace versus local conversations, decisions that got rushed through, that's my issue. That step should not have been missed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Tapsell.
Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt the councillor with the point of order, but I do need to correct a fact. We have heard quite clearly that it was a government decision and it was not the role of the Rotorua Council to consult. So a statement saying that we circumnavigated the significance and engagement policy, we have heard very clearly from the staff the facts on that unfortunately it wasn't council's role to do so, that's only government.
So can I answer that? No, I wasn't referring to the decision.
Councillor Patterson, thank you. We're Mayor Tapsell, have you got any further comments to make, or have you?
Can we just make general comments?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's been outlined quite clearly by the staff the consequences on if we were to proceed with this. I don't think the community would appreciate $1 million in 2 years down the track. That is a significant change and a significant backward step to the work that's already taken place. Remember that what we're talking about right now is exactly what you're concerned about, and that's the need for consultation. So the decision to go out to the community is actually a decision to say, hey, we want to hear from you. And that's an appropriate time for the community to tell us what they want the future of development to look like. I do also want to signal and acknowledge that for many in our community, the average house price of $670,000 is absolutely unattainable, even for a household of middle income, hard working families. So to allow this opportunity of medium density residential actually allows many in our community who may have an asset but not have many cash to use that asset that they have to ensure things like granny flats, to put another dwelling on the property for their child who can't afford their first home. So there is still a lot of benefit in this. I did want to ask a question of the staff. I've in a comment then, since medium density residential standards have been in place, we have seen very few actually come to fruition. Most of the housing developments that we've seen, even those that are a lot different to what we used to, where we do have 2 stories and a couple of dwellings going on a few sections merged together, are actually within our current guidelines already without having to use that medium density residential. And finally, and I'm getting nods from the staff, I think that would have answered my question. And the final comment is that we have a unique environment here in Rotorua where our soils are actually quite soft. So geotechnically, in a lot of areas, it is just simply unfeasible to go 3 stories high, let alone 2, which is why we haven't seen it very often at all. So I do have great confidence that the benefits from this will be significant for the families that need a housing solution. And as we've seen already since medium density, we haven't seen significant adverse impacts on our communities. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tapsell. Councillor Waru.
Tēnā koe te manu taiko, kia ora JP, Damon. No, just a couple of comments. In terms of the engagement and the kōrero around this particular kaupapa, there has been kōrero about it. And I appreciate all the, in terms of the FDS, or the marae hui and everything that you had. A lot of the community came to those, not even from those communities, but they were invited in to the marae to have a kōrero about it. And that was part of the conversation. But I'd like to sort of flag as to why, from a iwi perspective anyway, from what the kōrero that I got was in terms of papakainga, the MDRS allowed a whole raft of options around creating new papakainga and also upgrading current papakainga, and allowing that to happen in in an easier way, without jumping through all the loopholes and everything like that. So it was appreciated on that kaupapa. So I'll leave that one there. And just to end too, in terms of the engagement and talking about past decisions that have been made, and I think Councillor Patterson mentioned that we inherited this kaupapa, and in his view, it was not done right at that time. But then, what about all of there's been a whole lot of decisions over the past that have been probably, in the view of many different parts of the community, not tika. I can name about 10 of them off the top of my head, just from an iwi point of view. But is that going to open a door? Does that mean we're going to go and revisit every kaupapa in the past? I don't know. Even though I'm just talking about that particular comment, not in terms of the MDRS, but koe rā noho tāku. So actually, I'll just put it out on the table here that I will still be supporting the MDRS kaupapa, even though I do acknowledge Rob, good on you putting your kōrero forward. Hoi anō, tērā, kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Waru. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lee, for your motion. A couple of concerns I have, Madam Chair, is with the motion itself, what's the threshold? So the public engagement comes back and let's say we have either support or criticism of MDRS one way or another. Does it come back? I presume we will come back to Council for us to have to another vote to now decide whether we ask the Chief Executive to send a letter to the government?
I think we pass questions, Councillor O'Brien, if you want to...
Well, sorry, it was a rhetorical one more than anything because it's a concern about the motion and there seems to be some very open questions. And even if we sent a letter, sorry, I see on the timeline we're talking October by the time this consultation. Surely by then we'll definitely be into a caretaker status of the current government, and then surely we have the election. So we could be looking at quite a delay. And so, as I say, I unfortunately, perhaps if we had had an opportunity to talk through some of these concerns, but yeah, sorry, there's a lot of unanswered questions in this for me. I'm sorry, thank you. Although I do have a lot of sympathy with the general objectives that Councillor Lee has raised. Thank you.
No other comments, councillors? Councillor Wayne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, I would like to say, if we all look at the presentation, the decision to try and consult about undoing MDRS has significant risks, and I don't know how much clearer it could be that we're here discussing this motion that will have very significant consequences if it goes through. And following on from Mayor Tapsell's comments before, there's actually many standards, if we look at the MDRS documents, that any proposed development has to meet, including, whether or not including the landscape area needing to have 20% of the developed site in grass or plants, the glazing of the street-facing facades. There's so many standards that it actually has to meet, and I would say as a consequence of that, we have seen, as Mayor Tapsell has mentioned, there has not been an immediate increase, as I think Councillor Lee mentioned, of these infills, but it does provide that option for people who are in those circumstances to be able to put in a secondary dwelling, to put in a cabin, something like that, to help alleviate the situation that they're in, that our community is in, with the housing shortages. But in my view, it's a decision that has been made, and we're here discussing the future development strategy and hopefully planning a way forward so that we can actually move our district forward and not constantly be redebating these, like Councillor Waru mentioned, redebating these decisions that have been made in the past. And I agree, where do we stop with that? Do we go back 20 years to a decision that's probably with our infrastructure or something like that, that's probably caused us a lot of grief with investment into our infrastructure in our community. Where does it stop? So I'd like to see us move on and actually start having a bit of, I'll say, pride in our district, in our decision making, and having a bit of security, I would say, and trust in our staff, who are there because they are experts in their roles to do their jobs and help inform us in our decision making. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. I'm going to take one final comment from Councillor Brown and then I'm going to wrap this up.
Actually, Madam Chair, I haven't got anything to add. I'm sorry. I'm voting against, but...
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Lee, did you have one quick comment in lieu of Councillor Brown? Councillor Barker?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your lenience. Thank you to Councillor Lee for making this motion come forward, because I know that he reflects the opinions of a lot of the community, and Councillor Patterson's alluded to that. We find ourselves in this position as new councillors, which is very challenging because, we are dealing with a situation and some information that is new to us and has been formed before our time. In saying that, we trust our staff and the people that have put all this work together. We trust that they have engaged fully, and I can see from attachment 11 in our notes that the engagement has been full and across the community. And it has actually encapsulated a lot of feedback about MDRS, and I imagine that in our consultation going forward there will be some more that will come across our consultation process as well. I hope that this consultation will capture these views, and that at the regular reviews of our future development strategy that are done 3-yearly and 6-yearly will also capture the changes in opinion and the changes in our environment, and could lead to future plan changes even, perhaps. I don't know, that's just a supposition on my part, but these things could well be taken care of as we go forward, and watch carefully the way that this develops. But I will thank Councillor Lee, but I will be voting against that motion. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to wrap this up now. So, Councillor Lee,
just a point of clarification, please, Madam Chair. I did ask a point of clarification around amending notice of motion.
Sorry about
the amending of our notice of motion. I don't know if I got that feedback.
Sorry, I'll ask Una to reply. Sorry, I wasn't quite understanding your question, Councillor Wada.
Oh no, I asked whether a notice of motion could be amended or not.
So we'll come me to answer that through you. I'll get Una to answer that question.
So as it stands under a notice of motion with a mover and a seconder, no, it cannot be amended. Any amendments to a notice of motion can only be made once the mover has moved the notice of motion, and then with the majority of the council before the seconder. So in this case, because you had a mover and a seconder, you can't go back and amend the motion.
Thank you, Una. And through to you as well, Madam Chair, thank you. I'd like to thank you for actually taking the notice of motion on.
Thank you, Councillor Waru. Councillor Lee, your final right of reply, and then we're going to put this motion to the vote.
Do I understand correctly that we're not going to have an opportunity to... So I have signalled that I would amend the motion.
Well, you need to deal with the motion that's currently on the table, Councillor Lee. So to wrap up this process, as is normal, is that you would get a right of reply now that we've finished our round of discussion.
Following the vote, what happens there?
Well, let's deal with this first, and then we'll come to that. So,
well, I think it's important, given that an amendment has been foreshadowed, we need to know what's going to happen going forward.
Councillor Lee, I've asked that we just finish this process first, and we'll deal with that depending on the outcome of the vote. So you have a right of reply if you wish to take it up. I'm giving you that opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, Councillor Patterson, thank you for your comments, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. This is a democracy. That is the purpose of the Local Government Act. That is what we all swore to uphold when we took office. That is a solemn declaration that we took. This is not a bureaucracy. Even if we've got the cleverest, smartest staff in the world, this is still not a bureaucracy. The public, under the Local Government Act, Section 82, are entitled to be consulted on significant changes to their district. By circuitous means, our bureaucracy made a decision to approach central government prior to even a decision being made by the council. Submissions closed for that select committee on the 15th of November, or was it the 16th? A decision was made by this council on the 25th of November 2021. The consequences to the public vastly outweigh the inconvenience to this council and the cost to this council for having a sidestep to the normal planning process, which is what MDRS amounts to. Three dwellings, 3 stories high. There is a 3-storey property being planned by Kainga Ora on the corner of Ranulph and Malpurui roads. So 3 stories high is definitely possible under MDRS and practically likely to happen, or is currently planned to happen already. The public are entitled to have their opportunity to say, we don't want MDRS in this town. And it would be great if they had a council like the Christchurch Council who backed up the public on that. The process going forward, the cat's sort of out of the bag now. The public now know, and unfortunately may have to rely on the Daily Post to tell them, that MDRS can be withdrawn from Rotorua. The process for that, if the public were to feed back to council during this future development strategy submission process, if the public were to say, council, we don't want MDRS in this town, we're done with that, it's not a good fit for us, it'll change the character of our town, we like the provincial character of our town, we don't want big city Auckland kind of dwellings here. If the public were to say that to the council, the group of elected members here could make a decision and instruct the chief executive to send a letter to the Minister for the Environment requesting that Rotorua be excluded from MDRS. The Minister for the Environment, in consultation with the Minister of Housing, would then take to Cabinet for decision that request. It would then be over to Cabinet to make that decision and potentially exclude us from MDRS. Were that to happen, JP is quite correct, we would be back to the planning board, and then the public would have an opportunity to be properly consulted on a proper plan change, the way that the Local Government Act is intended to work, the way that the Resource Management Act is intended to work. I therefore ask for your support to give the public an opportunity to be heard.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillors, I'm now going to put the motion that Councillor Lee has put forward. So all those in favour of the motion that we're going to be replacing section 4.2.1, please raise your hands. All those against, please raise your hands. The motion is lost. Thank you.
Does that mean we can now move the amendment to it, Madam Chair?
Councillor Lee. 1 minute. All right, sorry, I'm just taking some advice from our staff in relation to amendments. So, Councillor Lee, what are you actually proposing now?
As Mr Gaston rightly pointed out, the original notice of motion was directed incorrectly at a staff report rather than at the consultation document that would go out to the public. So the amendment would be to direct that the words in my notice of motion apply to the future development strategy consultation document.
Well, Councillor Lee, the motion's just been lost, so I don't see any point in proceeding with an amended motion. In any event, under the standing rules, standing orders, the motion has already been considered, it has been lost and is not able now to be put again. So I'm going to now move on with the rest of the agenda, and we're going to now move to the recommendations that are in the current report. So I'll just wait for these to be pulled up onto the screen. These are at page... Sorry, get my page
Excuse
number.
me, Madam Chair. Can I ask that my vote be recorded, please? I wasn't sure what was going on there. I should have asked before.
I'll take that as
Thank you.
Right, councillors, page 31 of your agenda, we're now looking at recommendations 2, 3, 4 and 5, 6 and 7. As the chair of the Community and District Development Committee, I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Wang. I've moved it as the chair. So we've had a good and robust discussion today. What we have been focusing on is our 30-year future development strategy. What is the direction that we want to take Rotorua in for the next 30 years? We are looking at the opportunity for us to provide the right zoning for development, should we need it, for growth to occur in places where we want it, and we're going to go out with a significant piece of work to the community to consult with them, to ask them what they would like to see for a 30-year plan. We've had a significant amount of work done by the staff, and I'd like to thank Damon, JP, Simon and the rest of the team, Jason, for all the work that you have done. This has been a piece of work that has been going on for over 18 months. There's already been extensive community consultation that has been outlined in the documentation. We've got a robust process going forward. We are going to have a joint committee with the Regional Council. We are going to have an independent hearings commissioner who will have a resource management background. There is a consultation process that's been outlined so that we can get as much information and feedback from the community as possible. I'm confident that we will hear from the community as to what they want to see, what they want to achieve. But one of the things that we do need to address is that we have the right zoning in Rotorua going forward to ensure that we have the capacity for housing and for commercial if we need it. So I'm more than happy to support the motions. So I have a seconder in Councillor Wang. Councillor Wang, do you wish to also speak now?
I'm happy to speak later.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm voting in favour. I think what we've got on the table is a very comprehensive piece of work that the community will get a chance to feedback on. The piece that I like is that in 3 years it can be reviewed. So I see this as a domino effect. The long-term stuff, which I think Councillor Lee is concerned about in particular, won't come into effect. If the first domino doesn't fall, the second one won't fall. So, you know, there is a chance to review it every 3 years, and so it makes sense to me, and the community will be heard. So, well done, fellas. Great piece of work. As someone who participated in the spatial plan, I can see where it's come from and the sense of it. Thank you.
Councillor Kiriopa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support what's up there. I'd just like to highlight that the committee needs to include mana whenua representatives. Councillor Waru and Councillor White cannot be considered that. They are wearing their council representative hats. Rotorua Lakes Council has obligations to ensure the engagement of mana whenua in decision making, and I don't see that that is happening with that committee. Thank you.
Are there any further comments? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for all your team's work on this. Very comprehensive. I'm happy to support it going out for consultation. I appreciate the document, big and large as it is, couldn't cover every single thing. I would just like to make the comment that I hope in future councils and future officers take care and remember that nature was doing very well without us. And I hope that down the track that things that aren't in detail in this document around our wetlands and various things around areas that we've picked as growth, I just hope that we're also sufficiently around where those costs are and where those costs likely will fall, that we're also aware that we need to be environmentally aware and have plans in place to take care of that work and make sure that we're not trying to force growth in areas which nature's already saying to us, not a great idea. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen.
Councillor Waru.
Kia ora te manu taiko. Actually, just echoing the kōrero that Councillor O'Brien just said, you know, sometimes e pai ake, kia waiho te whenua, kia noho hai whenua, and the wetlands and all that kind of stuff. So I know that thinking's in there, and that huge amount of paperwork that's been done. However, that's a big thing, because that's one of the main kōrero that I've always heard back from any type of hui I've been to, is, you know, sometimes we have to make some sacrifices as tangata. Kia pai ai te whenua, kia pai me ngā wai o te arawa, o tēnei takiwa. So that's a good reminder. So thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Just on the other, another kaupapa too is, in terms of what Councillor Kiriopa just brought up around the mana whenua thing there, Councillor Taru White and myself are not there as mana whenua, quite right. We are there as members of of our respective councils. So something to have a think about moving forward. Other than that, I'm fully supportive of the kaupapa. And in that kaupapa, I hope we do have more discussion around the MDRS and the consulting kaupapa that we're going to be undertaking. Kia ora.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This to me is one of the more disappointing documents that I have had put in front of me since being elected. I don't consider it a consultation document. I think it sets out in great detail what the future that the, shall we call it, bureaucracy would like to see for Rotorua. I don't see much room in there for the public to push back or feedback on what the future development is going to look like. This document looks to me like it's pretty much ready for adoption now. I don't know what opportunity the public have to really make a difference on this. We'll see. But the only redeeming feature that it has is, for the first time, the public will have an opportunity to tell the council what they think of MDRS, and for that reason I'll be supporting this going out for public consultation.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I must say it is a very good body of work, and the meetings that we've had have been very informative, so thank you for your efforts. I know it's a long time coming to get to this point. And I would say that, please, for those people who are listening or will be reading in the press in the next day or so, please get involved in this process. This is your future. Make sure you have your say, and this councillor will do our very best to listen to what you have to say. We're not closed-minded. We are always open to new information and different points of view. Kia ora.
Thank you. Well, I've heard a number of councillors speak in favour of this. Councillor Wang, you've got the final word if we can make it brief.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to JP, the entire team, the small team, as you've mentioned, on the years of work that has gone into putting all of this together. I think for far too long, you know, as we've heard, the development in line with the growth has driven the planning into the many positions that many councils are faced with across the country. But we now have a chance to let the planning and growth drive the development and foster a future for Rotorua that is well planned and designed, that supports housing, our environment, business, industry, and attracting investment by providing that blueprint and security that we as leaders can provide to our district, that we have vision, hope, and unmistakably a plan that takes our community forward and brings them along with it. And I want to say, echoing our Chair's comments before, this plan is not about today or tomorrow. It is about 30 years, looking ahead 30 years and seeing what we can do to best position Rotorua so that we can have a secure and vibrant future. And I'll keep it short like that. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. Councillors, we've had a very robust discussion on this matter today, so I'm now going to put the motion. All those in favour, raise your hand. Against? Thank you. Carried unanimously. Thank you very much, and thank you to the team for your work on this. Councillors, we now have a resolution to go into public excluded just to confirm the minutes from the confidential section of the meeting. If there are no matters that need amendment, I'm happy to take this here.
I'll move that.
So, Councillor Wari, you're moving that the confidential minutes of the Community and District Development Committee held on 12 April 2023 be confirmed as a true and correct record. You've moved. Councillor Brown seconded. Any comments in relation to the correctness of the minutes? No. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Councillor Lee, would you like to close our meeting with the karakia?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and for a bit of novelty, we have some Hebrew for you today, the priestly blessing from the book of Numbers in the Bible, which will be in both Hebrew and in English. Yevarecha ve'eshmerecha, Yehovah paniv elecha v'khanecha, Visa Yehovah panav elecha vayasim lecha shalom.
Shalom.
May Yehovah bless you and keep you. May Yehovah make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May Yehovah turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen. Amen.
Is there lunch? No. We've got a substantive morning tea.